Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal. See playlist for other chapters and novels. Join now our Telegram channel now and enjoy exclusive early access. t.me/blood_immortal_official. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 561. If there's one advantage to this world, it's that there are so many trees. On the railing where Pandora had disappeared, Yuan, who had noticed that Asura's aura had disappeared along with her, quickly realized his intention. Is that all it takes for him to get upset? His opponent was Asura. A guy who was as prideful as Sun Ogong. Asura wasn't the kind of guy who would tolerate his opponent not giving it their all. And perhaps he had taken Pandora to see Yuan's true self. Thud. Yuan started to move in the direction where Asura and Pandora had disappeared. As he passed by, fortunately, there were no signs of a battle. It seems like he didn't put up much resistance. Pandora wasn't a pushover either. Even if her opponent was Asura, he couldn't have subdued her in an instant. That meant one thing, that she had followed Asura willingly. Ha! A sigh escaped his lips. It was a good thing that she hadn't resisted and followed him. If she had fought back and gotten hurt, he wasn't sure he would have been able to control his anger. I know what kind of personality that guy has. Creak. Yuan quickly ran along the path Asura had taken, cursing him under his breath. He's crossed the line this time. The world on the 38th floor was covered in trees. Asura had moved far away from the sun's chariot. It was to find a suitable place where they wouldn't be disturbed by the battle. And as he was running, Asura found a large clearing where all the trees had been cut down. Not bad. Asura stopped and pointed his finger at Pandora. He tapped her acupuncture point to seal her movements and sat her down on the ground. Stay still. Pandora, who had been about to say something, was surprised by her own voice not coming out. Pandora glared at Asura, as if to say that he wouldn't stay still if she resisted. Asura was already standing with his sword drawn. Just then, what an interesting sight. Thud. At the edge of the clearing, along with the sound of a tree falling, Asura noticed another presence. In the forest where he thought there would be no one, Asura turned his head at the presence that sent chills down his spine. Heracles. Even though there was a fair distance between them, it wasn't difficult to figure out who he was. He was so huge that he couldn't be anything but a giant. He had a huge axe on his shoulder and a lion's pelt on his head. His muscles were dense and firm, inspiring admiration. If you saw him once, you would never forget him. Asura, too, had been on the battlefield with Heracles. Why are you here? That's what I should be asking you. This is my home. Your home? It's just a little further that way. I've been living here for 1,000 years. The 38th floor was an abandoned world. 90% of it was covered in forest, and the remaining 10% was a barren wasteland that had turned into a desert. Very few people lived in this world. If there was one advantage to this world, it was that there were a lot of trees. That's why there were a lot of lumberjacks on the 38th floor. An axe instead of a club. Heracles' club was made of Yggdrasil. It was said that the power of Heracles, who wielded it, was several times stronger, and that he had no rival except for his father Zeus, Son Goku, and Vishnu. But an axe instead of a club. It was obvious at a glance what he was doing. The great Heracles was a lumberjack. There is no nobility in a profession. Get out of the way. Didn't I tell you? This is my house. There was nothing else to say. If Heracles was right, Asura was the intruder. If he was going to give up his seat, it would be right for him to do so. He had no argument. Usually, Asura had one thing to do in this situation. It was a show of force. However, Kim Yoo-hoon will be here soon. And Heracles there. Asura, who was already struggling to deal with Yuan, couldn't afford to turn him into an enemy. On the surface, he was a burly lumberjack cutting down trees, but Heracles was ranked second. He was the second strongest man in this vast tower. Are you just going to watch? For now. That guy you brought, Heracles, gentle eyes narrowed. He's my friend, ... murderous eyes. It was the first time he had felt so overwhelmed by an opponent's expression alone. He hadn't felt this kind of pressure even in his fight with Indra, his target. He's strong. He didn't usually acknowledge his opponent before fighting him. Even more than me, he couldn't help it this time. Swoosh. At that moment, a murderous aura poured out from the forest beyond the trees. Key. Thud. Wild animals jumped out and birds flew into the sky. Asura gripped his sword at the presence of Yuan slowly approaching from afar. He's coming. Clank. Until now, he had been easily defeated by Yuan, who had read his sword clearly. However, in the last fight, Asura had glimpsed a way to win. When he cut Yuan's cheek. After more than 10 defeats, Asura had finally found a way to break Yuan's sword. It'll be different this time. As that determination ended. Rumble. Dark clouds covered the sky, and night came in broad daylight. Crackle, crackle, golden lightning bolts poured out of Yuan's body as he approached from afar. I see you there, friend. Behind Asura, Heracles waved at Yuan. Asura looked puzzled at Heracles' reaction. Friend. When Heracles first called Pandora a friend, he thought it was strange. Heracles and Pandora, who was not very active and whose whereabouts were not even properly known, were said to be friends. On the contrary, the more curious thing was the guy right before his eyes. It was Kim Yu-hoon. He was also close with the great emperor of the heavens. And Pandora, and now, even with Heracles. Chi-ji. The distance gradually shortened, and the mana felt from Yuan approached him coldly. This feeling was not unfamiliar. It was as if all the mana spread throughout the forest was following him. The mana around Yuan amplified and branched out on its own as if it was trying to please him and prove its loyalty. Supreme Heavenly Lord, the guy was drunk on that power and lost sight of the weapon he was holding. However, Yuan was different. After losing 10 times, Asura knew that he was an outstanding swordsman more than anyone else. What the hell are you? It was the same question he had asked a few days ago on the sun's chariot. But even though it was the same question, Asura wanted to ask it again. What the hell are you? You seem pretty angry. Heracles looked back at Asura as if he was in a difficult position. Judging from the sight of Pandora bleeding from her head, he knew why Yuan was so angry. You'd better run away while you still can. Then you might be able to keep your last remaining head. Thanks for the advice. That was what he said. He's not listening. Heracles sighed and shook his head. Asura's smile hung on the corners of his lips. Just by looking at that crazy smile, he could tell that Asura had not listened to his words properly. Well, perhaps Asura would welcome this kind of reaction from Yuan. Because blood and death were probably not objects of fear to him in the first place. Well, Heracles watched Asura, who was approaching Yuan with his sword in hand, with his arms crossed, watching the interesting situation that would unfold. Thanks to him, I'll be able to see with my own eyes what that guy went through. Open hollow corner bracket, you only get one chance. A loud voice rang in his head. I know, it was as if he didn't trust himself, and the voice warned him several times, but Asura answered inwardly. It was meant to tell him to stop nagging, but the voice didn't disappear. Open hollow corner bracket, that guy's sword resembles ours. Close hollow corner bracket. Open hollow corner bracket, pierce his heart with your first strike, so that he won't be able to get up again. Open hollow corner bracket, keep this in mind. We are weaker than that guy. Even more so now that he's angry. But there is a chance that we can win. Pajij, Ppajij. His forehead wrinkled in annoyance. He knew. He was weaker than the guy in front of him. But even so, Asura had no intention of remaining a loser. Even if he was weaker than his opponent, he would win. I am Asura. Asura's arms split into 6. 2 spears, a vajra, and a sword. He crossed a total of 6 weapons. With 2 expressionless heads, their eyes closed. He spread out his lightness skill and flew toward Yuan. You should have waited for me to fall asleep. With a calm gaze and voice, the blade in Yuan's hand began to move. I could have forgiven you for that. Swish. As expected, the tip of the blade moved in a familiar trajectory. To properly witness this one moment, Asura had experienced 12 defeats and hundreds of revivals. Now, 3 Asuras moved together. An afterimage unfolded as if 6 weapons were merging into one, creating a single, elongated spear. Great severing heavenly law. Long ago, a martial art he learned and mastered through a secret technique he had obtained from the Murim world. Having mastered the spear of Jungpa, he soon devoted himself to the demonic cult and perfected his own spear. Whether it was an ancient rancor, or perhaps before the Murim world had laid its foundation, or maybe even a secret technique that had come from outside the tower, no one knew. But Asura, who had learned and mastered it, did not hesitate to make it his ultimate technique. Screech. The magical power at the tip of the spear, imbued with red energy, created a complex airflow and rotated rapidly. A spear merged into one, the distance suddenly increased. Before Yu-Won could swing his blade, Asura's great severing heavenly law approached Yu-Won's chest. Success. The great severing heavenly law was the most piercing and destructive technique among Asura's techniques. It was a moment, the heart hidden within the clothes and flesh was pierced. At that moment, as the unfolded projectile was about to pierce Yu-Won's chest. So you finally figured out the great severing heavenly law. Spot. Quote exclamation mark quote. As Yu-Won twisted his body, the great severing heavenly law that Asura had shot out pierced through the empty space pointlessly. Qua. Snap. Thud. The magical power shot from the tip of the spear knocked down the trees in a straight line. If you looked at it from the sky, it would have looked like a red line drawn on a green background. He dodged that. Thwack. A sword pierced Asura's chest. In an instant, Asura made eye contact with Yu-Won, who had approached him and swung his sword. Fire and gold eyes. Odd eyes composed of red and gold eyes. The skill symbolized by those eyes was known to be only the fire and gold eyes possessed by the great sage, the equal of heaven. But how does that bastard have those eyes? Not only that. Thud. Yu-Won's biceps swelled up. The symbol of the giant slayer and the skill representing Hercules, gigantification, unfolded in Yu-Won's hand. Boom. Asura's body fell backward from the heavy fist that struck his face. However, this is the 13th time. Unlike usual, Yu-Won's momentum did not subside even though the fight was over. 87 times left, in his gradually fading consciousness. Let's finish it here. At those words, which were like a death sentence, Asura's body trembled. Chapter 562. However, Asura did not know Yu-Won. Bang! A fist struck right next to his head. Once again, Asura could not do anything. If that fist had been aimed at his head, perhaps his remaining head would have been squashed like minced meat by now. That makes 50. Whiz. Yu-Won turned his body. Kwa. Lightning flashed above his head, which had moved a small distance away. It was that lightning again. Asura had been struck by that lightning, and his body was paralyzed so that he could not do anything. 50 times. He had not been seriously injured, but Asura could not do anything. Helplessness enveloped his body. He knew that his opponent was strong. Even before he had come here, he had already lost to Yu-Won more than 10 times. However, he had never thought that the difference would be this great. Just how? Zeus lightning. Flash. In the middle of speaking, a long thread of electricity flew towards Asura's throat and stopped. What would have happened if he had not stopped it? He would have certainly died instantly. Now there are 49 left. Yu-Won no longer conversed with Asura. When he opened his mouth, it was only to kindly count the remaining number of times. Buzz. Clang. After striking several times, the sword finally broke. The hand holding the sword became numb. Soon, Yu-Won's sword pierced through the air next to Asura's head and was embedded in a tree. Poof. 48. The number was slowly decreasing. 47. Bang. 46. 40. Asura was not injured anywhere. The only injuries he had were the chest that Yu-Won had cut in the beginning and his swollen cheek from being punched. Since then, Yu-Won had not cut or hit Asura, but had only been suppressing him. What should I do now? How can I win, with the 6-extremity annihilation art broken and having suffered more than 50 defeats? Asura thought and thought again, facing each other's heads. A way to defeat the monster in front of him. If there was even a single, tiny hope, Asura would never give up. However, swish, cuck, Yu-Won's hand grabbed the nape of his neck and lifted his body. The fiercely burning eyes stared at Asura's eyes, and a flat, emotionless voice recited. 31. The moment he met those eyes. I can't win. Along with the helplessness from giving up, all of his strength left his body. Thud. Asura collapsed to the ground as Yu-Won released his hand. His body was still trembling, but something much greater than his limbs had been torn from him. His mind. Fear was planted in Asura's mind. Asura gave up on any further challenges. Exactly when there were 31 matches left, he knelt down and sat on the ground. His eyes were dead. Asura, who had no will to fight, was no longer Asura. Yu-Won stood there for a moment, looking down at Asura, who had his head bowed. Whether it was because he was scared, he no longer attacked and did not even lift his head. Did Vishnu act like this as well? No, the Vishnu that Yu-Won knew was not this tame. That was why he had to do it 100 times. However, thinking about it, there was no need to be fixated on that number. Swish. Pandora, who had been freed from the bloodstain and was now sitting on a mat on one side, was eating snacks with Heracles. After reconfirming her safety, Wu Wan regretted his choice for once. I should have done it like this from the beginning. Wu Wan had fought Asura, who was a master of martial arts, with just a single sword. It did not matter. He was confident. Wu Wan knew Asura better than anyone. He had also learned martial arts from him and had eventually won the fight. However, Asura didn't know Wu Wan. Wu Wan knows his opponent, but his opponent doesn't know Wu Wan. That worked as a significant advantage for experts above Rancor. To make matters worse, Wu Wan had far superior skills than Asura. He subdued her without getting hurt and subdued her again. That was how Wu Wan planned to keep fighting and winning until Asura gave up on her own. The problem was that he tried to be like Vishnu. If he had just suppressed Asura from the beginning, she wouldn't have been damaged at all. Crunch. Do you want to eat? Heracles handed Wu Wan a fruit-filled cake and a fork, which he had brought from somewhere. Did you come here for a picnic? Who suddenly barged in? Who is still leisurely working on trees in these times? Leisurely, trees. Heracles' face frowned slightly. I'll say it again, I can put up with you ignoring me, but I can't put up with you ignoring the lumberjack. Okay, here you go. Wu Wan cut him off and took the fork. He hurriedly began to eat the cake. Maybe it was because he had moved his body around a lot, but the sweets tasted sweeter. Wu Wan soon quietly put down the fork as Pandora stared at him eating a whole cake by himself. Phew, why are you laughing? I'll treat you to a meal when you're hungry. It's been a while since you've been a guest. Yeah, it only took half a day to break Asura's spirit. Before they knew it, the sun was setting and it was getting dark. Thank you, Heracles, thank you. I might have gotten a little excited if it weren't for you. Heracles was standing next to Pandora. If it weren't for that sight, he wouldn't have been able to be calmer than he was now, looking at Asura. You seemed pretty excited. Was that real? Was I that excited? You looked angry. For rankers with an almost infinite lifespan, a few decades were not that long. However, it didn't mean that the concentration was the same just because the time was short. Heracles thought that the time he had spent with Wu Wan was more concentrated than any other time. As such, they knew each other well and had seen many different sides of each other. However, he didn't think he had ever seen Wu Wan express his emotions like this before. Do you really care about her that much now? No. Heracles lowered his voice and asked, looking back and forth between Wu Wan and Pandora. Do you love her? You, or Sun Ogong, or really? He didn't just ask, but seemed to be teasing him. Be honest now, don't be shy. When did I? You're even getting married. Wu Wan's mouth hardened at Heracles' words. Marriage. It had been over 10 years since Pandora had courted Wu Wan. In the end, Wu Wan had made up his mind to marry Pandora and was planning to do so. It wasn't something that could be done with just one-sided feelings. In any case, it was also Wu Wan's wish to be with her. Aren't you doing it because you like it? Then show it a little. You lucky bastard. At Heracles' words, Wu Wan looked back at Pandora, who was eating the rest of the cake he had left behind with cream on her lips. I never thought I'd hear such nagging from you. He laughed. He hadn't expected Sun Ogong, but Heracles, who used to see women as stones, was talking like this. He wondered if he looked that stuffy, or if the world they had protected had become so livable. Before, under the sky that had turned purple because of outer, it was an unimaginable conversation. Wu Wan nodded. Certainly, he was aware that he was stingy and stiff in his expression. It's true that I'm aware that I'm reserved and stiff in my expressions. Only recently had it gotten a little better, but the fact that I've become timid like this is probably because I've been fighting for so long in the future. Of course. What about you? It wasn't something that only applied to you on. Who are you not meeting? Hargan told me to do so. To meet someone. Why don't you introduce me to them? He said he would. But, I'm not mentally prepared yet. You only resemble your father half the time. I will. ... A silence came over us for a moment. An awkward atmosphere fell over us for a while, and Hercules awkwardly got up from his seat. Are we going? Thud, thud. Pork skin was being roasted deliciously over the soft firewood. While roasting the meat whole, Hercules looked at Asura, who was sitting still in the distance. How long is he going to act like that? It's going to be quite a shock. Yuan, who was wiping his wet hair as he walked over, followed Hercules' gaze and watched Asura's reaction. But he needs this much shock therapy. You washed up quickly. The water was cold. It was a terrible way to treat a guest. Hercules chuckled at Yuan's joke and put a poker in the dying fire. Hercules' back was turned. He asked without looking back at Yuan. Are you going to tell me now? Why you came to find me? Do I need to have a reason to come? It must be a difficult reason, seeing as you're beating around the bush. There was no way that Yuan would have come all the way to this mountain without any business. And just a while ago, he had defeated 3 overseers in the heavens. Right after that, Yuan had come to find him, and he had no business. Not even a dog passing by would believe that. It's about the war, isn't it? Yuan nodded at Hercules. Question. Probably. Are the enemies this time more dangerous than those guys? Are you talking about those like Shub-Niggurath or Nyarlathotep? Nyarlathotep, the name, Foolish Chaos, might be more familiar. It was an unfamiliar name, so it was awkward. Yes, those guys. Yuan's answer came a little late. At this moment, it was difficult to answer right away when he thought about what Hercules' feelings might be like with his back turned to him. What kind of answer do you want? Thud, the firewood that he had put in the fire broke in Hercules' hands. Hercules nodded as he watched the shattered wood crumble to the floor. That answer is enough. Yuan didn't deny his question. Perhaps it would be a battle just as difficult as the battle against the outer gods. Because the overseers were like symbols of this world. I asked you why you came. Hercules turned his head. Yuan, with a towel on his wet hair, had an apologetic expression. You might not want to fight, but now is not the time to be leisurely chopping wood. Leisurely, chopping wood, it was something he had heard just a little while ago, but this time, those words didn't sound unpleasant. Because, even at this moment, there must be people fighting somewhere. You need to help, Hercules. When he said those words, Yuan closed his eyes. It was none other than Hercules. He was different from the battle-crazy Sun Ogong or Asura. He was someone who was stronger than anyone else but hated fighting more than anyone else. Someone who had become a woodcutter who didn't need to fight anyone after all the fighting was over. To him, he was saying something truly cruel. Swish. Hercules looked up at the sky. The stars that had fallen down below the firelight came into his view. It was the sky that they had protected. He couldn't lose it again. Starting today I guess I'm temporarily retiring from being a woodcutter. It was time to swing a club instead of an axe for the time being. Chapter 563. Ashura, who had been sitting still in that spot until dawn, suddenly disappeared at one point. Wu Jin didn't think he had changed his mind. After all, he had lost the bet with him. If you lose to me, promise me you won't kill anyone without my permission. I'll accept your challenge about 100 times. The guy with more pride than Son Goku was Ashura. The Ashura that Wu Jin knew was a guy who would willingly give up his life if the price of the promise was his life. So he would probably keep his promise. It's surprising that he disappeared. I thought he would stick with me for a while since he can't kill without my permission. He had no idea where Ashura had gone. However, he had an idea where he might have gone. Training. He had given up on the challenge because he had been discouraged in the fight with him. It was an ultimate defeat, but he was a guy who walked the path of Asura. He was a guy with no end to learning and getting stronger, so he might have realized something in this fight. Anyway, Tsutsutsu. The sky was splitting. He had come out to get some fresh morning air, but he had unexpected guests. You're quick with the news. A pure white halo poured down, cutting through the dark pre-dawn sky. The Olympians on their sun chariots. And the warrior who led them, sitting on the throne of war and wisdom. Athena. Wu Jin didn't avoid her eyes looking down at him. Did she come to see Hercules? Or me? He couldn't tell what her purpose was. Still, judging by the number of rankers she had brought with her, it didn't seem like she had come to fight. She doesn't seem particularly hostile either. However, Wu Jin felt a lot of doubt in her eyes as she looked at him. It doesn't seem like she came here without knowing anything. Thud, thud, he could feel heavy footsteps behind him. Hercules and Pandora, who was rubbing her sleepy eyes next to him, came into view. This is the first time I've had so many guests. Sleepy. Pandora, who had been dozing while standing, leaned against Wu Jin's chest. She seemed comfortable with something to lean on, so she closed her eyes again and fell asleep. In the middle of all this noise, Hercules stretched his sore body and looked up at Athena. Come down, sister. Wu Jin turned his head in surprise at Hercules' words. Hercules asked Wu Jin, who had a surprised look on his face. Why, right, she is your sister. You just realized that? No, I knew it before. I just forgot for a moment because of your face. A crumpled expression. Hercules knew too, that his face looked old compared to his other siblings, including Aphrodite and Athena. The two seemed close. Athena looked down at the two of them for a moment before grabbing the reins of the horse she was riding and coming down. I had a little trouble finding you. Athena looked around at the surrounding trees. The world of the 38th floor, which was densely packed with trees. Finding Hercules there was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Her tired expression was probably because of that. Why did you come all the way here? Hercules's gaze turned to the rankers lined up behind Athena. And with all these armed women, Athena's followers. They played a role similar to Asgard's Valkyries within Olympus. A force of female warriors. Although their numbers were small, the fact that they had moved meant that it was quite an important matter. It must have been because of them. The reason why you're so vigilant. I would have welcomed you if you had come alone, sister. As you know, I'm quite the outcast in Olympus. Don't worry, if I had intended to fight you, father would have come in person, not those guys. If he comes, crackle, golden energy flared in Heracles' eyes. If he comes, Zeus. Heracles was unusually sensitive to that name. Athena spoke to Heracles, who was fuming, with a bitter expression. It seems you still haven't reconciled. It's not reconciliation, but forgiveness. I'm trying, so don't rush me. Heracles, mother, Alcmene. She had lost her life to Zeus's scheme long ago. Although it was to create a perfect being called Heracles, he could not easily accept Zeus, who had been involved in his mother's death. Not reconciliation, but forgiveness. Even that was an effort for the father and son. That was Zeus and Heracles. I see, I understand. If there's anything I can do, I'll apologize. You already did, father did. Athena's eyes wavered. It had been a long time since she had doubted her ears like this. Heracles, words were that hard to believe. None other than Zeus. He had apologized to his son. If he hadn't, would I have stayed in Olympus? Of course, that makes sense. Let's end this unpleasant conversation here. Why have you come all the way here, sister? It's strange to talk while smiling. Athena muttered with a wry smile. She had not expected to be treated like a guest, but their first meeting had gone wrong from the start. It seemed that it was a mistake not to come alone and to mention Zeus's name in vain. Moreover, father calls for you. From now on, any more words would only provoke Heracles further. And this one too. As Athena pointed to Hargan with her, Heracles' excitement grew. Crackle, crackle, why is this guy talking? Friend. It didn't feel like a simple title. The conversation he had just had with Hargan was the same. Heracles, who had been cutting down trees in the mountains without any friends, treated him like a very comfortable person. Moreover, calm down, crackle, crackle, rumble. He was so excited to hear that he was looking for him. I can't, I'm a warrior from today, not a woodcutter. From today, Heracles' gaze shifted to Hargan. Hargan sighed and tapped his forehead at the gaze. Is this guy trying to hide it or tell me? He was grateful for the sensitive reactions of Athena and Zeus, who were looking for him. It meant that they cared about him that much. However, Heracles' words just now were no different from admitting that he had been affected that much because of Hargan. Moreover, you don't have to. Hargan reached out and grabbed Heracles by the shoulder, who was standing between him and Athena. I was going to go anyway. Where? To Olympus. He had not come to Heracles just to borrow his strength. I need to see that bastard Zeus's face. Heracles, who had the second highest status in Olympus after Zeus. He thought that it would be more helpful to enter Olympus with Heracles than with Hargan to increase his say. Zeus, that bastard. Athena's forehead twitched. The words spoken by Hargan grated on her ears. Their father, who was like the king of this world. If she let Zeus be spoken of so lightly, she would no longer be Athena. You speak rather recklessly. Athena glared at Yuan with narrowed eyes. Yuan looked into her eyes and asked, do you know who I am? Well, I've never really heard of you. You'll be hearing a lot about it now. Athena glared at Yuan with narrowed eyes. Yuan looked into her eyes and asked, you're just as suspicious as your father. What do you mean? Never mind, what's the point of talking so much? But, click, he loosened his finger joints and put his hand in his inventory. We're going to go anyway, so your attitude needs to change a bit. In response to Yuan's reaction, Athena also took out her aegis. I think that's something I should say. With that, Athena looked back at Hercules. More than anyone else, his permission was needed for this fight. Even if Athena was ranked third among the three gods in Olympus, she could not recklessly take out her weapon in front of Hercules. He was the absolute being that not even Zeus, the king of Olympus, could handle recklessly. Do as you please. Hercules nodded his head. As Athena pushed back the surrounding warriors and began to confront Yuan, he smiled faintly and added, if you can. Athena stood facing Yuan. She raised her Aegis shield, her forte, and shouted. Is he really the one? Kim Yuan. He didn't seem like much on the outside. As expected, there was no face that came to mind even after seeing him in person. Even after looking into his past actions, she couldn't find any proper traces. That was why Athena couldn't easily believe the news of the man in front of her. A ranker outside the rankings. No, maybe not even a ranker. This was the first time she had encountered such a mysterious opponent in the tower where rankings existed. Was that why Zeus became even more interested in him? I've heard rumors. When he first heard the news from Hargan, he thought that he was just an extraordinary guy. That the admins would appear in the Heavenly War. That's why Zeus's help was needed. On top of that, he asked for lightning bolts. Zeus didn't dislike such recklessness. No, rather, he liked it. Rankers had to be extraordinary, but Zeus had seen countless rankers who weren't even worth stepping on. However, none of those rankers had ever dared to ask him for such a favor. That was why Zeus wanted to know more about him. However, I heard that he took down the admins even though he's on the lower floors. Isn't that funny? A guy who can't even be found in the rankings. Unlike his first thoughts, the guy who seemed like a piece of rough jade was already like a finished star. He took down the admins. 3 of them, no less. Even though Hargan had witnessed it, Zeus didn't believe it until he saw it with his own eyes. Is he an admin, or is he an outer? Or maybe he's one of the rankers that the administration bureau hasn't found yet, or maybe it's all just a rumor. He had to know the guy's identity. So Zeus gave Athena one instruction. Find this guy named Kim Yuan. If what Hargan said is true, his next destination will be the 38th floor. What am I supposed to do when I go there? Bring him here. He wanted to see Kim Yuan in person. Athena couldn't understand Zeus at all. As a guest, or, the method or treatment doesn't matter. I'll leave it up to your judgment. And then, finally, Zeus revealed his true intentions at the very end. It would be even better if you could find out if the rumors are true. Chapter 564. Defense through Aegis, offense through the sword. Wu Wen held a sword in his hand. He just stood there with a sword in his hand. Is he not moving? Athena frowned slightly as she watched her motionless opponent. It was as if he was provoking her to try to cut him somewhere. Was he confident in his abilities? If he's confident, then so be it. This fight was not about winning anyway. Confirmation of the opponent. That was the real purpose of this fight. Then where? Pot. He said he was confident, but there was no need to see it. Shall I check it out? Kwang. Athena's sword cut Wu Wen's body in half. At least that's how it looked. But there was no sensation on his fingertips. Chew. The figure disappeared like a mirage. The image of Wu Wen being cut by the sword was reflected in Aegis. Athena's eyes lit up at the speed at which Wu Wen, who had returned behind her. Fast. She was caught from behind, but she didn't panic. She had never set a limit to her opponent's abilities in the first place, so there was nothing to be surprised about. But, in the first place, Athena's true strength was not in swords. Speed is not a problem. The reason why she was really strong was because of this. Keying. Aegis shield is activated. Targets. Slowing. Begins. Targets. Petrification. Begins. Slowing and petrification. It was an ability built into Aegis. Aegis. One of the masterpieces created by Hephaestus, the tower's greatest blacksmith. After it was broken once, Athena asked Hephaestus to strengthen Aegis a little more. Aegis was a motion-activated item that Hephaestus created using the head of a monster called Medusa. Its power was so strong that it could turn even the bodies of formidable high-rankers into stone. More than anything, this is unavoidable. The range of Aegis, power was everything within the range reflected in Aegis. Jing. Aegis, influence swept across the entire range of the battlefield. Creak, thud, grass and trees hardened into stone. Even Athena's followers, who were far away, were caught in its power and their bodies froze. Lady Athena is using Aegis. If it's this powerful, it's fully activated. I guess she judged that the opponent was that dangerous. They were followers who had been by Athena's side since she first became a ranker. Aegis was a shield that made no distinction between friend or foe. Athena did not try to borrow the power of items for trivial matters. It was because of her belief that it was not her own power. Nevertheless, now, for the first time since the last war, Athena had activated Aegis. That meant, ka-thud. In this fight, Athena was putting the name of Olympus on the line. I won. If you were hit by Aegis, petrification at that distance, you might be frozen for a few years. Wu Wan's form, frozen in ash. The warriors of Olympus, who were convinced of their victory, soon relaxed their tension. There had never been a case where someone who had been turned into stone by Aegis had returned to their original form on their own. But, creak, Wu Wan's body, which was definitely turned to stone, began to crack. No way. The moment she felt something was wrong, Athena's body moved first. She hurriedly thrust her sword into the chest of Wu Wan, who was frozen into stone. It was an instinctive judgment that if the petrification was ever lifted, she had to finish him off before it was lifted. But, quaduk, clang, quote exclamation mark quote, in an instant, Wu Wan's sword, which had broken the petrification, knocked away Athena's sword. Clatter, clatter, she was pushed back in the contest of strength between swords. It was reckless. It was her own fault for not putting enough strength into her sword-wielding hand, thinking that his body was still frozen. No, even putting that aside, his stats are higher than mine. Quack, gripping the sword that had been knocked away, Athena charged at Wu Wan again. Gripping the deflected sword tightly once more, Athena charged at Wu Wan again. A fist extending slowly, defense through Aegis, offense through the sword. The balance of offense and defense was Athena's greatest strength. Clang, clang, boom, the sword swung with all her might tore through the air each time. Athena, who had been cutting down elm trees, lifted up Aegis, which had been used for defense, thinking that this would not do. Hup, veins bulged in her forearms, and magic-infused Aegis. A considerable amount of magic power. Hercules, who had been watching the fight, widened his eyes in disbelief. Sister, no way. In the brief moment that Hercules thought, no way. She slammed the shield, which had become too heavy for her to handle, into the ground with all her might. Gung, z's. The ground caved in. The shock from Aegis turned the ground upside down and swallowed up Hercules' house, which was not far away. As Hercules, who had suddenly fallen to the ground, jumped up high and screamed. Athena checked Yuan's figure reflected in Aegis and recited the last incantation. Answer my call. SSSSSA. The sound of a snake echoed throughout the battlefield. Athena, drenched in sweat, released the seal on the monster within Aegis. Medusa. The Aegis shield is activated. Medusa answers your call. SSSSSA. The snake-headed pattern that appeared on Aegis. Hundreds of snakes poured out through the pattern. It's Medusa. Close your eyes, everyone. As the monster's hair appeared, all of Athena's soldiers closed their eyes tightly and turned their bodies away. If they were to make eye contact with one of those snakes or be bitten by its fangs, they might never wake up from petrification. However, I have no regrets to this extent. Yuan put the sword in his inventory and faced Medusa's snake's head on. Medusa's head was the same as Aegis' main body. The petrification ability could not be compared to a simple incantation. If he were to make eye contact, let alone be bitten by their fangs, it would be difficult to be safe even for a demigod. You're overconfident. Athena, who had tried to stop Medusa, thinking it was dangerous, soon made up her mind. If he was the kind of guy who would lose his life over mere pride, then Zeus wouldn't have been interested in him in the first place. Stopping Medusa was not a suitable test for him. However, crackle, crackle, it was at that moment that golden lightning began to flow through the ring in Yuan's hand. A familiar flow of magic power. As far as Athena knew, there were only 3 people in this vast tower who possessed that power. How did the author? Thunderbolt, a power that only Zeus, Hercules, and Halgan, who inherited his bloodline, should possess. Quang, the moment that power erupted from Yuan's hand. Kya, SSSSIIIIK. The bodies and heads of hundreds of snakes were torn apart or burst. A wave of golden lightning filled the area around Athena. The magic power of the lightning attribute, which boasted a wide range, swept across the battlefield through the ring Yuan wore. How do you have that? No, it's a little different from that guy's. Crackle, crackle, crackle. Yuan walked towards Athena, cutting through the waves of golden lightning. This is the real original. What remained in Zeus was not the thunderbolt, but the remnants of the thunderbolt that had remained for a long time because he had possessed the thunderbolt. So the real power of the thunderbolt that Olympus knew was now. It was closer to the power that Yuan was wielding. Gulp, gulp, of course, this is not a fake either. Yuan's fist extended forward. Yuan's fist stretched out. Athena handed Yuan an invitation to Olympus. As his fist slowly stretched out, it seemed as if he was intentionally giving her time to dodge. But, gigantification. At that moment, Athena froze in place out of shock and couldn't dodge. The power contained in Yuan's arm. It was the skill that symbolized Heracles, the high ranker who represented Olympus alongside Zeus. Kwang. Athena's body, which had quickly raised aegis, floated up into the air. A heavy shock was transmitted through the shield. Thud, thud, it felt like the hands holding the shield were going to break. She was being overpowered. It wasn't just a simple difference in strength. Send the repair bill to Zeus. Yuan's voice could be heard from beyond the shield. Whoosh, aegis, where Yuan's fist had struck, crumpled. Quang, along with the shield, Athena's body was slammed into the ground. After that, she couldn't remember anything. It didn't take long for Athena to regain consciousness. 30 minutes. It was the time it took for Athena, who had collapsed with the crumpled aegis, to regain consciousness. Are you awake? Under the shade of a tree. As Athena slowly opened her eyes, she found the worried faces of her subordinates looking down at her. Athena slowly got up with a slightly dazed expression. As she looked around to assess the situation, the subordinate who was holding the crumpled aegis spoke. I was worried. You suddenly lost consciousness. Did I lose? Yes. Unfortunately. Athena shook her head at the subordinate's addendum. What's there to be sorry about? There's such a big difference in our abilities. The last moment, the power of gigantification and lightning that unfolded in Yuan's hand was something that Athena couldn't possibly handle. Just looking at the aegis that was crumpled right before her eyes proved it. Aegis, an item that was considered to be one of the best defensive items in the tower, had been crushed in an instant. If Yuan hadn't held back at the end, it wouldn't have ended with just her fainting. Just look at how he lifted the petrification. Athena had fought against numerous strong people up until now. Among them were Poseidon, who had come to her seeking to test Aegis, and Gigantes. They had one thing in common. Petrification didn't work on them in the first place. Nevertheless, Yuan didn't resist the petrification. It was because he was confident that he could lift it even if he was petrified. Step. Yuan slowly approached Athena. He looked at Athena, who was sitting on the floor with one knee bent, and asked, looking at the crumpled aegis. Can you move right away? Thanks to you. Athena bowed her head. I appreciate your consideration. Ah, Lady Athena. What is it? The surrounding warriors were surprised at Athena's changed reaction. Athena, who bowed her head respectfully with an honorific. There were only two people in Olympus to whom she showed such an attitude. Hades and Zeus. Athena was now showing the same attitude towards Yuan as she did towards those two. Despite the commotion among her subordinates, Athena didn't pay any attention and got up from her seat to greet Yuan respectfully. Now that she had confirmed it, she couldn't help but treat Yuan differently from before. I was going to go anyway, so I guess my attitude should change a bit. Yuan said from the beginning that he had business in Olympus. But he had a problem with the way Athena treated him. He didn't seem like the type of person who cared about formality or etiquette. Nevertheless, Yuan mentioned his attitude and showed Athena his abilities. In the first place, she wasn't someone he should treat so disrespectfully. The king has invited you to Olympus. Unlike before, he spoke respectfully. Will you accept the invitation? Athena handed over an invitation to Olympus to Yuan. Chapter 565. After Vishnu's funeral, Deva was filled with more anger than ever. If Olympus had Zeus and the three gods, Deva also had its own three gods. Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva. They were the gods who had led Deva for a long time, and Vishnu, who had the shortest period of activity among them, was the spiritual pillar that Deva's high rankers expected. Moreover, it was revealed more than 10 years ago that they were actually three beings born from one called Vishnu. Vishnu's death this time was no different from the disappearance of all the gods of Deva. Revenge must be taken. Some of Deva's high rankers insisted that they should fight the administrator even at the cost of their lives. A war with the administrator. While Deva was in deep contemplation over whether it might disappear into history. Varuna, the only aide who had watched Vishnu's death. You know, don't you? Varuna's body trembled at Yama's question. What, who Kim Yu-won is? I can tell from your expression and recent reactions. You're not that good at lying. Some time ago, Yama had asked Varuna about the name, Kim Yu-won, with Vayu. And then, Yama carefully observed the expressions of the two. Unlike Vayu, who heard the name Kim Yu-won with one ear and let it go, Varuna alone showed a different reaction. Have you been thinking about something since then? What is it? It was Lord Vishnu's last words, Varuna. Swish. Yama's hand grabbed Varuna's shoulder. We have to find him. It's not just the administrator's problem. Gandharva, Britra, Akshaya, Ananta. They're all after us. Even Ananta, a monster that had been going up and down the upper and lower floors of the tower for a long time, and an old enemy of Diva. Varuna's expression turned serious when his name was mentioned from Yama's mouth. When did he wake up? It's been a long time. Then why has he been so quiet until now? He must have needed time to recover as he had been sealed for so long. And Lord Vishnu was still alive. Time and Vishnu's existence. Both of these problems were meaningless now. Time had already passed long enough, and Vishnu was no longer in this world. Moreover, there is a traitor inside Diva. There was another, bigger problem. Are you kidding? I'm serious. And it's someone pretty high up. He knew that Lord Vishnu was going to meet the administrator. Really, there is a traitor in Diva. Those words were more shocking than any other story. Among Diva's high rankers, there was no one who had not received a favor from Vishnu. But to commit treason, come to think of it, they said that even in the heavenly realm, Supreme Lord Laozi changed his mind. So then. Speaking of which, I heard that Supreme Lord Taishang has changed his mind in heaven. If that's the case. Who is this Issa anyway? How does he know Olympus's physiology so well? It was a perfectly possible story. Despite Varuna falling into confusion several times, Yama continued his final persuasion. It's not just a matter of Vishnu's revenge. This is a matter of survival. Diva may disappear forever, Varuna. Varuna squeezed his eyes shut. There was a promise he had made. However, even so, the promise he had made with Wu Won was not more important than Vishnu's will in the survival of Diva. Actually I know. At Varuna's answer, Yama sighed in relief. Fortunately, there was no way he could have found him on his own. Fortunately, Varuna already knew the one Vishnu was looking for. I don't know him, but I hope he leads Diva's destiny. He probably will. The one I know is more than capable of doing so. That much. Actually, you know him too. He had just forgotten. And now people remembered him by a completely different name. Kim Yu-hoon. He was the hero who saved heaven. The sun chariot that Athena had prepared was on a completely different level from the one Wu Won usually rode in terms of size. Just looking at the number of passengers, it could carry over 500 people. Only about a dozen people, including Wu Won, Heracles, and Pandora, had boarded the sun chariot of that size. Even compared to the original, it doesn't seem to be much different. It was the first time Wu Won had seen a sun chariot of this size. He had ridden in the real sun chariot that Apollo had, but it was only a replica version, and it was on this scale. The performance is the same. It can reach up to 70% of the speed of the sun chariot Apollo has. Really, there are only 3 of these types in Olympus, but today is special. Athena trailed off her words and glanced at Heracles. If it were just Wu Won, she wouldn't have to worry, but since Heracles was someone she had to take care of, she couldn't help but be especially careful. What do you have to say? At Wu Won's question, Athena's eyes flickered slightly. I have something difficult to say, so am I not just adding useless words like this? You're quick-witted. Your expression is so obvious. I reported Mr. Kim Yu-hoon's information to my father. At Athena's words, Heracles turned his head. It was a typical reaction from him, who was more sensitive than anyone to the words, father, or, Zeus. You can be upset. If so, I will bow my head and apologize. Not really. Are you okay with it? Everything the children of Zeus know, Zeus will know. I know that much. Then I'm glad. Athena's voice trailed off slightly. She followed Wu Won, who was approaching Heracles, and a question mark appeared over her head. Relief and doubt at the same time. Who the hell is this, knowing Olympus's physiology this well? Wu Won, Pandora, and Heracles, who seemed to be friendly. Athena, who slowly examined the relationship between the 3, took out a kit again and contacted Zeus. A whole day. It was the time it took for the sun's chariot to reach Olympus. With Athena in the lead, Wu Won and Heracles followed behind her. Athena turned her body. She asked for Wu Won and Heracles' understanding. I'm sorry, but I think this is as far as I go. My father wants to see the 3 of you separately. Athena bowed her head and said goodbye before leaving. Heracles stared up at Olympus's giant temple for a while, lost in thought. Heracles, who couldn't easily move his feet. Wu Won tapped him on the side and asked, telling him to get a hold of himself. Are you okay? Yeah, pretty much. How long has it been since you were here? It's my first time since the war. It's been a long time, then. I thought I'd miss my mother if I came here. So I didn't come. Do you want to go back? No, it's not that. I just wish I had come sooner. Heracles shook his head. He smiled after realizing the expression he had been making until just now. It wasn't as big of a deal as I thought. With those words, Heracles started to walk towards the temple. One of the temples owned by Olympus's high rankers. A temple like a kingdom called Olympus, and Temple of the Sky. As he climbed the high stairs that led up to the clouds, the appearance of Olympus came into view. And at the entrance of the temple, "You're here, our youngest. How long has it been? Who's that behind you? Isn't that Pandora?" One could see 6 rankers sitting across from him at a long table. Aphrodite, Dionysus, Artemis, Hermes, Hades, and Creek. "Welcome, my friend." He was always full of passion. Harken had already sat on one of Olympus's thrones and was waving his hand to greet Yuan, who was visiting the temple. He came quickly. Harken, who was sitting shoulder to shoulder with the other Olympus high rankers. Yuan found Harken's appearance unfamiliar. He thought that Harken had probably been in that seat for the shortest amount of time. Yuan and Harken were tutorial buddies. Although he had the opportunity to gain Zeus's thunderbolt in the meantime, his talent was truly dazzling. "You know Harken, so that punk is Kim Yuan. He's a new face, all right." The Olympus rankers looked at Yuan. Among them, Hermes's gaze was caught by the shoes Yuan was wearing. "Aren't those my shoes? Ordinary shoes made of leather." But Hermes, the original owner of those shoes, couldn't help but recognize them. Click, click, Hermes approached Yuan wearing light slippers. He examined the shoes Yuan was wearing and became certain. It was the shoes he had worn. "My friend, where did you get those shoes?" "I got them from the 11th floor trial." 11th floor? Ah, right, come to think of it, I sold those after receiving points from the Administration Bureau. Halfway through his sentence, Hermes recalled something that had happened a long time ago and his eyes widened. "How many points did you pass that trial with?" A long time ago, Hermes had sold his shoes after receiving points as a reward for the 11th floor trial. Of course, there was no greater purpose, such as nurturing his juniors. He simply needed a large sum of money because he had spent all his money gambling. 11th floor. It was a world where Hypnos, the ranker of Olympus, was the test supervisor. As such, he had once asked out of curiosity who would end up with his shoes. "They probably won't be able to leave this world." Hypnos's answer was firm. Even if father were to challenge it again, it would be difficult. After that, Hypnos explained the rules of the test he supervised. A battle royale to capture a flag. In that battle, they would collect flags to accumulate points, which would be converted into points to choose their rewards. After hearing about the rules and the price of the shoes he had sold to the Administration Bureau, Hermes had thought that he would never see them again. "However, do you have any intention of selling them back to me?" Having met the item Zeus had gifted him a long time ago, Hermes couldn't help but sparkle his eyes. He had sold them because he desperately needed money, but it was difficult to find an item as good as that one. "No, why, I'll give you a good price. If you need, here, Dionysus. I have plenty of points too. And I like these quite a bit." Hermes's gate. Among the items that were in the form of shoes, it was the type of item that matched Yuan the best. It was an item with a skill that allowed one to jump in the air without the help of magic power. In addition, it made the user's feet lighter, making it quite convenient in everyday life. That was why Hermes had regretted selling them to the Administration Bureau after the fact. Profit. At Yuan's refusal, Hermes gritted his teeth and glared at Yuan's feet. After that, wings appeared on his feet. Hermes flew behind Yuan's head. Hoit. Soon, as Hermes's palm touched Yuan's shoulder, a message appeared due to the skill. Hermes is stealing Hermes's gate. Ownership of Hermes's gate is being transferred to Hermes. Swish. And at that moment, Olympus's hospitality is quite lacking. Hermes's wrist, which was resting on Yuan's shoulder, was grabbed, and the skill's activation was forcibly cancelled. It's just as I heard. Chapter 566. Yuan walked inside with Heracles. Heracles' hand grabbed Hermes. With this action, Yuan denied Hermes's divinity that was known throughout the world. The wanderer of freedom and thieves, was it? Was he a thief or a robber? He was confused for a moment, but it didn't matter. The important thing now was that this bastard had tried to steal his item. Crack. Hermes groaned from the pressure on his wrist. Should I break it, Hermes? Hey, you bastard. At the sudden situation, Aphrodite and Dionysus jumped up from their seats. Breaking his wrist was one thing, but what Hermes had just done was not something you should do to a guest, as Yuan had said. Even if it's the shoes you were looking for, how can you do this to father's guest? Yeah, you asshole, just break his wrist and apologize. Break his wrist. What a loving family, Hermes screamed as he was stepped on by Dionysus and Aphrodite. The two of them kept an eye on Euan and Heracles. Euan, who had come as Zeus's guest. And Heracles, who was ranked second in Olympus, no, in the tower. Hermes's actions just now were enough to displease both of them. Zeus is in there. At that moment, Hades, who was drinking tea on one side, pointed to the inside of the temple. Go and meet him. Heracles nodded his head slightly to finish his greeting and walked past him. Euan and Pandora, who weren't particularly interested in his wrist, did the same. As he walked, Euan looked around the place that had become noisy because of Hermes. Olympus's high rankers are all gathered in one place. Most rankers were like that, but Olympus's high rankers were especially individualistic. Even though they were connected by blood, there was only one case when they would gather together. It was only when Zeus summoned them. The number of times Olympus has gathered in one place can be counted on one hand, including the Gigantomachy. But it just had to be now. It couldn't be a coincidence. It must not be a coincidence. Wu Wan walked inward with Heracles. Thud, thud. Only the sound of footsteps echoed in the high-ceilinged corridor. Pandora, who had been following slowly beside him, grabbed Wu Wan's collar. Feeling the trembling at her fingertips, Wu Wan turned to Pandora and covered her hand. Do you want to stay here? No. Are you okay? Pandora nodded. Her answer was a little late. It seemed that it was quite difficult for her to make a decision. He thought about trying to persuade her, but then stopped. Because she had already made up her mind. Not just a moment ago. All the way up to this point. She had remained silent even though she knew she would meet Zeus. It was a decision she had made after much deliberation. It was not something that he could shake. Chirp, chirp. The sound of birds could be heard as they approached the center of the temple. And the sound of water and the cool breeze brushing against their faces. We've arrived. He had only heard about it, but this was the first time Wu Wan had come this far. Zeus's dwelling, a place where the sky was wide open and a pond flowed with grass. You've come. Sitting at the edge of the pond, Zeus asked. With his still golden hair and handsome middle-aged face, Zeus greeted Wu Wan. Kim Yu-Wan. The 90th floor was in the middle of dawn. Beneath the window where the moonlight poured in. Varuna sat with his head bowed, pressing his brow for a long time. His head was filled with the story he had shared with Yama. Kim Yu-Hoon, you say? Kim Yu-Hoon is Kim Yu-Wan. Yama's expression was one of disbelief as Varuna explained. Did that really happen? Have you never thought it was strange? Strange? Well, so did I. Far from strange, I never even thought about it. In retrospect, traces of Wu Wan remained all over the tower. Unlike Diva, who was not very closely related, there were many incidents related to him in Olympus and Asgard. However, no one remembered or tried to think about Wu Wan. Probably no one can think of it even if I say it like this. Not until you actually die and see it. I can't believe it, no matter what. You probably won't believe it until you see it with your own eyes. Can I meet him? Can I meet you? Are you just going to turn around and leave? It was a difficult question. Strictly speaking, Varuna only knew who Yuan was, but they weren't that close. Fortunately, he got a reply to his text asking if he could visit. He told him to do as he pleased. I should meet him for now. Today, Varuna decided to go and meet Yuan, even if he had to go alone. The destination was set. It was the 66th floor, where Olympus was located. Are you going to meet Zeus? It was a good move. Even if the world didn't remember him, Zeus had no choice but to recognize someone as skilled as Yuan. Furthermore, Olympus was known as the best guild in existence. The influence of its master, Zeus, spread throughout the tower. Then, Diva will have to do something about it. Swish. Varuna, who had been lost in thought under the moonlight, got up from his seat. He could no longer chase after a woman's butt. Such peaceful times were over, and now he had to fight to regain that peace. He was ready. He was prepared for all his future actions to be stained with blood. Just like that, the moment Varuna got up from his seat and went outside. Where are you going? A familiar voice entered Varuna's ears. Varuna. Varuna looked up and saw a man in white sitting on a tree. Bayu, you're up early. It doesn't suit you. It was something he would say, knowing Varuna's usual sleepy nature. However, it was also very strange that he was here at this hour. Why are you here? Just because I couldn't sleep. Don't talk nonsense. Why are you in front of my house when you can't sleep? While he was talking, suddenly, something brushed past Varuna's head. There's a traitor inside Diva. Traitor. A diva ranker who leaked Vishnu's information to the administrator and helped drive him to his death. Is it? The question mark that popped into his head grew rapidly in size. Cold sweat began to run down Baruna's face, and at the same time. Swish. Just in case, Baruna slowly began to gather his magic, moving one hand behind his back. Bayu. Yeah, just in case. Just in case, I'm asking you this. Baruna's eyes glinted blue in the moonlight. Are you really planning on going back? Vayu let out a grin at that question, with a face that she had never seen before. Nope. Boom. Wind flew towards Baruna and slammed into her. Not at all. Drip. The water barrier that Baruna had put up shook. If she hadn't prepared herself in advance, it would have been difficult to react. You blocked it, Vayu. Baruna made a bow of water and aimed it at him, asking as the unthinkable became reality. Why in the world are you doing this? Why do you ask when you know? Didn't Yama already tell you? So it really is true. Clang, thud. The tree that Vayu had been sitting on was blown to pieces and disappeared with the impact of the collision between Baruna's arrow and Vayu's fist. Baruna moved by stepping on the roofs, and Vayu quickly closed the distance. Kriak. The bowstring was pulled taut. Just as she was about to shoot it towards Vayu, there was a brief moment of hesitation in her fingers. And at that instant, whoosh, you've fallen too far, Baruna. Riding the wind, Vayu's hand, which had suddenly closed the distance to right before her nose, came into close contact with Baruna's body. Crash. The wind that pierced Baruna's torso pressed down on the ground. At the same time as she let out a scream, Baruna snapped her fingers. Gush. A pillar of water rose from the ground. Pushing away Vayu's mana, Baruna quickly rode the pillar of water and soared high into the sky. Phew, wheeze. Sweat dripped down Baruna's forehead. The sudden use of a skill that consumed a lot of mana had also caused her stamina to drop sharply. A moment of hesitation had resulted in a lot of damage. Still, I got away cleanly. Why did it have to be you, Vayu? Why? Who among us hasn't received a favor from Lord Vishnu? That time, you stopped me when I was angry at Yama. You were angry at the administrator with me. You saw that correctly. That was sincere. But why? Baruna. Bitterness drifted across Vayu's expression. Whether we're high rankers or whatever, we're nothing more than accessories to the tower. Even if our lifespans are infinite, we're still beings that will eventually die. So, that means you betrayed Lord Vishnu because you wanted to live in the present. Who saved your life when you were about to die? A long time ago, Varuna and Vayu, along with Diva's rankers, were once saved by Vishnu. Ananta. It was Vishnu who saved Varuna and Vayu, who had lost their families and colleagues to the monster. Because of that, Vayu and Varuna pledged their loyalty to Vishnu together. Diva soon became their home and family. At least that's what Varuna thought. I appreciate it, but, however, doesn't that mean we can't all die together? Apparently, that was Varuna's only thought. Thud. Vayu approached Varuna. He continued with a bitter expression and voice. In the battle 10 years ago, the tower lost King Odin. The Demon King and Heaven lost half of their power, and Diva lost several high rankers, including Kubera. I couldn't forget it, that day 10 years ago. It was the first time in the tower's long history that several large guilds joined forces to fight a war. Including Odin at the time, how many high rankers died? The fact that about 30% of the rankers registered in the rankings had disappeared since that day was enough to show how awful it was. We've been getting weaker and weaker because of the fight with the Outer and the foolish Chaos's scheme. What are you trying to say? It was about 5 years ago. The administrator came to me. He said it was time to reclaim what was theirs. Recalling that day, Vayu raised his head and looked at the sky somewhere as he continued. We can't win, not with just the ones who are left. However, what? 5 years ago, Varuna was more concerned about what Vayu said than what he said. 5 years. If it's 5 years, when did they forget about him? As I thought about it, I burst out laughing. Hey! Varuna said to Vayu, who was still mumbling about the past, with a smile. You miscalculated. Maybe. No, I'm sure of it. Vayu must not have remembered him. Chapter 567. At the same time that the lightning was released, Heracles' fist stretched out in front of Zeus. Quote. Vayu looked at Varuna with a puzzled look on his distorted face. Varuna was laughing out loud. He was laughing at himself for miscalculating. What are you talking about? You'll find out later, but be prepared to regret it. Puck. Veins popped out on Vayu's forehead. Varuna's ability to rile him up was still intact. They had been friends for a long time, but Bayu thought it wouldn't be strange for him to clash with Baruna at any moment. And that moment was now. You're still so relaxed. With all this chaos going on, how can Diva just sit still? Baruna's house wasn't that far from Diva's stronghold. Just stall for some time. Surely you can't hold me off for 5 or 10 minutes. Although he had suffered losses due to his hesitation, the difference in ranking between Baruna and Bayu wasn't that big. Originally, the abilities of the two people were about equal. The difference was so small that they could only see the outcome after fighting all night. However, you're thinking too short-sightedly. Huh. Unexpectedly, Bayu's reaction was calm. It was as if he had something else to rely on. Do you think I'm the only one? What? Baruna looked up with surprised eyes. In his field of vision, far away, he could see lights rising above the dawn glow. Surely, not only Bayu. The flames burning on the ground. The village ruled by Diva was burning down. Boom. At that moment, a fist stretched out. Bang. Baruna, who had quickly raised his bow, blocked Bayu's fist. No matter how careless he was, he couldn't get hit twice for the same reason. Groan. Bayu's hand grabbed Baruna's bow. Bayu, with a face that had changed eerily compared to before, leaned his head toward Baruna. I'm not an idiot. Why would I have moved alone? Swish. Bayu's hair rose up slightly. Despite the murderous intent that Bayu was shooting at him, Baruna's gaze was directed at the burning village of Diva. Who else is it? Crack, crackle, an electric current that couldn't be hidden flowed through Heracles' body. Just now, Zeus, the name that came out of his mouth. Kim Yu-won, how do you know that name? Zeus definitely didn't know Yu-won's name. That was why he tested Yu-won with Hargan's news and confirmed Yu-won's existence through Athena. If he had remembered Yu-won from the beginning, he wouldn't have gone through such troublesome lengths. It hasn't been that long since I found out. Why, is it a name I shouldn't know? If so, that's unfortunate. Eyes looking at Yu-won meaningfully. The one who made me fall in the first place, and the one who put me back on the throne. The one who took my lightning. Was he smiling or glaring? You know who the culprit is, don't you? Zeus' expression couldn't be read just by looking at it. I can't let my guard down. He had a hunch. He didn't know about other people, but Zeus. He wondered if Zeus would remember him. Of course, it was just a feeling, and there was no proper basis for it. That was why he had only thought of it as a possibility. Just a 1 in a million chance. Thump, thump, Heracles walked towards Zeus. His footsteps were heavy, so he seemed quite excited. It seemed that he, too, was surprised by the fact that Zeus remembered Yu-won. Don't you know that that's not what I'm talking about? Then, don't beat around the bush with me. I'm asking how you found out. It seems that it's still awkward for you to call me father. I understand. Flash, light burst throughout the temple. As soon as Hercules' fist shot out in front of Zeus the moment the lightning was released. Thwack, Zeus' finger collided with Hercules' fist. Kaboom, lightning bolts shot up high into the sky above the temple that had been blown open. The lightning bolts that shot up from the bottom to the top were quite spectacular. Yu-won blocked Pandora in front of her in case she got caught up in it. Zeus, who had blocked Hercules' fist with his finger. It was no surprise. To begin with, Hercules' fist just now was nothing more than a simple threat, not sincere. Didn't I tell you clearly? I'm not helping Olympus because of you. In the world, Zeus and Hercules were known to have a relatively good father-son relationship. However, that was only as far as it was known. As he had told Athena, Hercules could never reconcile with Zeus. That was why he was trying to forgive, not reconcile, with him. And even that forgiveness would probably take hundreds or thousands of years. Nevertheless, Hercules willingly used his power and name for Olympus. Hero. It was an adjective that was always mentioned before Hercules' name. Hercules' existence alone was like a deterrent to war. Zeus needed Hercules' power and name to calm down the tower, which had fallen into chaos after the war with Outer. Hercules was well aware of that fact. That was why he had no choice but to act as Zeus' son, which he didn't like, outwardly. As much as I try to forgive you, you should live properly. That's the least you can do to apologize to my late mother. Yes, I promise. You make promises so easily. Hercules. Tap, tap. Yu-won, who had approached Hercules, carefully tapped his shoulder. Isn't it too much for you to remember just my name? You haven't even, done anything yet. Hercules, who had been very excited, scratched his head as he withdrew his fist. Thinking about it, that was true. The only thing Zeus had done was remember Yu-won's name when everyone else had forgotten it. Hercules was the one who had reacted sensitively to the name, father. That's right, Hercules suppressed his excitement with an awkward cough. Instead of Hercules, who quickly calmed down and took a step back, Yuan faced Zeus. Yuan's gaze towards Zeus was not very kind either. Why are you looking at me like that? Do I still not catch your eye? What do you? In the middle of his sentence, Zeus' gaze turned to Pandora, who was right behind Yuan. Her hands were trembling. No matter how prepared she had come, she still felt fear in front of Zeus. You opened the box. One day, Zeus came to Pandora, who had opened the box. The great and ominous power she had suddenly gained. Zeus beckoned to Pandora, who was trembling with anxiety over that power. Clank! A chain of lightning bolts bound Pandora's body. Leaving Pandora, whose body was restrained, behind, Zeus left her with words that were like a death sentence. Lock up the sinner Pandora in prison. Do not release her until I give you further instructions. That day, Pandora saw Zeus' laughter. It was as if he had known this would happen. A dark and cold prison. Chains strong enough to seal off magic power and restrain even a high ranker's body. For a long time, Pandora had been in that darkness. It was a long time that was boring, lonely, and scary. And at the end of it, Pandora transformed into the air floating in the void of nothing. Right, that's right, Pandora was there too. Keying, Wuan Jiamjiang, is activated. Yejian, is activated. Gamgok Jadi, is activated. Chiji, Heart of Oranos, is activated. A ring that began to shine in Yuan's hand. The Heart of Oranos. The real form of lightning created by gathering the Oracle of Olympus. You shouldn't say that. Chiji. The electric current flowing from the tip of his ring-wearing hand wrapped around his fist. Zeus's eyes lit up when the real lightning he had possessed long ago showed itself. It was the first time he had seen the power of Oranos at such a close distance. Zeus, showing curiosity, was that why? He ended up thinking that Yuan was angry as an afterthought. And so, the next moment, Paget, Yuan flew in front of Zeus's eyes, drawing a bright yellow golden line. Just one hit, Kuik, the power of the giant dwells in the right arm. Pak, Zeus, who was hit in the head, flew away with a cheerful sound. Tongue, thud, Zeus, who had rolled a few times on the floor, lay stretched out in a large shape. A situation that happened in an instant. Wow. Clap. Hercules, surprised, kept his mouth open and hardened, while Pandora clapped her hands with her eyes wide open. Yuan, who was still staring at Zeus, who had collapsed on the floor without releasing his activated skill. Hercules asked him cautiously, "Are you okay? What is? If you do something wrong, this is." The opponent was Zeus, the greatest king in this tower. Yuan's attack just now could have been seen as a declaration of war against Olympus. That monkey or that bastard, this guy. Even if Son Goku had done this much, he would have been surprised. Hercules calmed his surprised heart. If it was Yuan, there must have been a reason for doing it. For now, I had to ask him that first. Why did you do that? I promised. Yuan looked back at Pandora, whose trembling had disappeared. I told him I'd hit him if I ever saw him again. Only then did Hercules understand Yuan's sudden behavior. Pandora, a beautiful and noble woman whose name had disappeared from Olympus until 10 years ago. Her tragedy began with Zeus. Just like the death of Hercules himself and his mother Alcmene. The problem is that damn father. Suk. Zeus slowly raised his body. Hercules looked at him with anxious eyes. Maybe a war with Olympus. Are you satisfied with this? Zeus, who brushed his head, which had been hit by Yuan, with one hand. Zeus frowned after confirming that blood was coming out of his palm. Your fist is sharper than I thought. I didn't know you could use gigantism. Hercules made a puzzled expression. He wondered how he could persuade Zeus, but he gave such a bland reaction. What was more surprising was Yuan's reaction. It's not all over yet. Is there more? A lot. If that's the case, let's pay it back slowly. There's plenty of time. Zeus calmly replied to Yuan's calm response. It really seemed like these two were the guest and landlord who had just swung their fists and got hit by them. Then, Zeus, who got up from his seat, pointed to a table on one side as if nothing had happened. Let's hear what you know. Chapter 568. Slurp. The teacup was filled, the chaos from before had disappeared somewhere, and a leisurely tea time was created. Heracles had a face of continuous shock as he watched Zeus, who was personally brewing and pouring the tea. Drink up. Do you like tea? I remember you enjoying alcohol more. I don't enjoy alcohol that much. I drink it because I need to, not because I like it. Zeus savoring the aroma of tea. It was a sight that he wouldn't have believed if he hadn't seen it with his own eyes. Heracles sat on the narrow chair and reached out to pick up the teacup. The teacup held by his fingers. It looked like a miniature toy, so Heracles put the teacup down again. Zeus looked around at the three people, including Heracles. Of the three people other than himself, none of them were drinking tea. Aren't you all going to drink? It smells good. I feel like it might be poisoned. The cup is too small. TCH. Zeus finally put down his teacup after Pandora made a gesture of spitting carefully. I should have brought alcohol instead. Is your cheek okay? When Heracles asked, Zeus stroked the spot on his cheek where U1 had hit him and replied. There's some blood, but I'm fine. My mood isn't that great, though. Honestly, I'm surprised. I thought you'd be furious. Getting hit once or twice isn't a bad deal. It's 100, no, 1,000 times better than turning someone like that into an enemy. The reason why Zeus wasn't angry despite being punched out of nowhere. It was because Pandora had calculated his hatred and Yuan's anger. He was a more calculating person than anyone else. He weighed the pros and cons and controlled his emotions more rationally than anyone else. Yuan, who appeared with Pandora. After confirming the relationship between the two, Zeus thought he wouldn't mind getting hit once or twice if it could appease Yuan's anger. At Zeus's answer, Heracles looked at Yuan, who was pouring the tea in Pandora's cup onto the floor. He told her not to eat this and instead handed her the chocolate he had in his inventory. Does that mean he acknowledges her that much? Even Zeus, who had the most treacherous disposition, did not want to turn him into an enemy. The being who was the only one to bring Zeus, the king of Olympus, down to earth. Indeed, it was not an unbelievable story. Of course that would be the case. Zeus was not foolish enough to turn him into an enemy just because his pride was a little hurt and dented. Next to him was Hercules. There was also the great sage, heaven's equal, and Pandora. And more than anything, Yuan was stronger than anyone Hercules knew. Even if the entirety of Olympus moved, they could not guarantee that they would be able to do anything to him. Just once. It was just once. If that was enough to put Yuan in a good mood, Zeus was willing to take it. Of course, Yuan knew that too, which was why he swung his fist without worry. This guest treatment is enough. Tell me why you called me. Didn't you also have a reason for coming to find me? Yuan and Zeus's words clashed. A situation where they both had something they wanted from each other. When the conversation paused for a moment, Yuan shrugged and said, well, the order doesn't matter. You go first. How much do you know about the admins? The question came as soon as his words ended. Yuan grimaced at the reaction as if he had been waiting for it. Why are you suddenly asking about that? You definitely know. Otherwise, you wouldn't have shown yourself so quickly. There was no hiding in his tone of voice that suggested he knew everything. I know. Of course, that didn't mean he was going to reveal everything. That those guys aren't as great as they seem. Are you planning on hiding it? Neither you nor I are the type to move as a team. I'll give you the information you need, but I'm not planning on telling you everything. Zeus was a dangerous being. He was much more than just a few admins. Even Mimir, who was no one else, had judged that he could not fully understand his mind, so it was not bad to be cautious. The most important thing is the nature of the magic power those guys have. Nature. Long ago, the admins made a contract with a being. That's how they gained the ability to use mana like it was their own. A total of 100 admins. They lured players to this tower and used the system to drag them higher up the tower. That's why most players considered them to be like gods. However, aside from that, administrators aren't that special. They're just a bit stronger than ordinary rankers. Not gods. No, those who have created their own myths and gained divine status and divine power should all be considered gods. Then, the rankers of the tower should already be considered on par with the administrators. That's going to be a problem. For them, I see. Quote question mark quote. Quote question mark quote. Heracles and Pandora had bewildered expressions. They didn't understand Zeus, who was nodding his head, saying, I see. What the hell does he mean by that? Zeus put down his teacup and added an explanation for the two people who couldn't understand what he meant. As time passed, the player's strength has grown stronger and stronger. Even I'm not that scared of administrators anymore, so they must be feeling it too. Ah, Heracles nodded at that explanation. The players are surpassing the administrators. The beings they had always looked down on were starting to feel threatening. Heracles himself had felt that way. When did it start? At some point, Heracles had started to think that the administrators, who had seemed as high as the sky, weren't that great. Is there a separate strategy? Not really. After all, the abilities they have are ultimately in the form of skills. How do you know that? I have it too. Clank. A sky-blue mana bead floated up from the palm of Yuan's outstretched hand. Mana that was as tightly packed as a smooth glass bead. Mana orb. It was a very basic skill to be showing now. Just like Lee Sungyun, there were cases where talented players learned Mana Orb from the tutorial. However, what Yuan was trying to show now wasn't a simple Mana Orb. A light sky blue. It's the most basic color of Mana. And as you know, Mana Orb can change into any attribute depending on the nature of the Mana. Whoosh. A sphere of Mana that burned like flames. Even fire. Crackle. Lightning that covered the flames. Lightning. Goo. Plop. Regardless of whether it's darkness or water. Huh, pretty. Unlike Pandora, whose eyes sparkled, Heracles and Zeus opened their mouths in surprise for a different reason. A mana sphere mixed with 4 types of attributes. It would have been surprising even if there were only 2, but 4 types of attributes that could not be mixed together were mixed together. Are water and fire attributes that can be mixed together? Unlike other rankers, Heracles was not very knowledgeable about the attributes of magic power. However, even Heracles could understand how great it was to see what was unfolding before his eyes. Pong! The mana sphere exploded and the magic power of the 4 attributes scattered and rose into the sky. Zeus was surprised as well. It's something like this. Of course, the proficiency is much lower than those who have been dealing with this all their lives. Ordinary rankers could handle magic power with 2 attributes at most. Furthermore, even that was not very efficient, so most of them, like Zeus and Surt, insisted on using only 1 attribute of magic power. Nevertheless, Yuan had been using several attributes of magic power at the level of a top high ranker. I wondered how he handled so many attributes of magic power. Now I understand a little bit. The magic power used by the administrators. If he knew how to use it, he could understand the understanding and control of magic power that Yuan had shown so far. Since it has the form of a skill, there is definitely a limit. I confirmed that in the last fight. The last fight? In heaven? Yeah, so, what did you confirm? Skills that strengthen weapons or the body are more effective. It will be half as effective if you shoot it out by directly releasing magic power. And that means... Yuan's gaze turned to Heracles and Pandora. It means that melee combat works more favorably in a fight against those guys. At those words, Heracles hid his surprised expression and looked back at Zeus. If the form that shoots magic power directly is disadvantageous, it's a natural enemy for my father. Zeus's position was a spearman. He was a high ranker who could throw a spear farther and more powerfully than anyone else. On the other hand, Heracles was capable of more powerful close combat than anyone else. There was a reason why this guy came looking for me right after the battle in heaven. That wasn't very good news for Zeus, in any case. However, contrary to his expectations, Zeus's reaction was rather indifferent. Good information. I'll pass it along. Don't just share it with Olympus, send it to the other guilds as well. I'll do as I see fit. More importantly, how did you find out about this? I saw it firsthand. That can't be all there is to it. If you're curious, find out for yourself. Yuan had an insolent attitude, and Zeus chuckled at him. That's another thing I find annoying and amusing about you. As the king of Olympus, Zeus had met countless rankers. And among them were those who could undoubtedly speak and act as equals to Zeus. Great beings such as Odin and Vishnu. However, none of them gave off the same feeling as Yuan. You really are different, a kindred spirit. That was the feeling Yuan gave Zeus. He didn't feel stifled when conversing with him. It was the first time since Odin that he felt like he was having a real conversation. Everyone else in this world felt like a doll. Ignorant and identical. He couldn't tell the difference between the monsters with low intelligence and self-awareness and the rankers at the top of the tower, except for the fact that they could talk. That was why Zeus had spread his seed. To create a great kingdom on this tower, a kingdom he had established. To create descendants who would inherit the name Olympus. His greatest masterpieces, Hercules and Halphus. But before them, there was an even more excellent creation right before his eyes. There's just one thing missing. Zeus's gaze turned to Pandora, who was right next to Yuan. The one thing that set Yuan apart from him. What did he need to do to fill that void? While Zeus was lost in thought for a moment. It's your turn now. This time, Yu-won spoke about the reason he had come here. Go ahead. Rather than a question, I'd like to ask a favor. A favor, I would like to use Olympus's information network. Is it because of the traitors the administrator planted? Zeus smirked as if he knew everything. You don't have to worry about that. I've already figured most of them out. What about Deva, Vishnu? More than anything, Yu-won planned on unraveling the secret behind his death first. That's a bit tricky. It was as if he knew that question too. It might be a little late because of you. Zeus had already begun to move his pawns. Chapter 569. The fierce flames of hellfire engulfed the village. The village was filled with screams. Among the crowd desperately fleeing the flames, a woman with crimson hair stood tall. Hurry up and go, you fools. If you die, you'll get penalized. Flicking her crimson hair, she inhaled the black smoke like a sweet flower fragrance. She leisurely admired the scenery amidst the flames she had caused. The flowers are blooming beautifully. Her words were drowned out by the screams, unheard by anyone. I mean the flames. These flames were the source of her happiness. Surya. The flames parted to the left and right, and crimson flames engulfed Surya. The waves of flames collided from different directions and shattered. Surya grinned and greeted his old comrade who had appeared before him first. As expected, you were the first to arrive, Agni. What is the meaning of this, Surya? The man with crimson hair tied up. Agni glared at Surya with eyes full of fury. Agni, a high ranker who controlled flames, possessed eyes that could see and sense flames wherever they existed. Furthermore, he could go anywhere where there were flames. Why did you? Is there a need to explain? We're enemies now anyway. Really? Flames intensified with anger. That was the nature of those who wielded flames. Are you saying you've betrayed Deva right now? Yup. The two collided. That's what I'm saying. Flames erupted in the sky like a festival as Surya and Agni clashed. Agni's flames devoured Surya's flames, and in turn, Surya's flames wrapped around Agni's flames as the battle continued. The two controlled magic of the same attribute. Moreover, they knew each other well. I can't subdue him easily. Even for Agni, his opponent was Surya. 185th place. In terms of ranking alone, he was a few ranks higher than Agni. Although her abilities were lower than Agni's, there were more forces following Surya in Deva. Fortunately, there were not many casualties. Was it because of the penalty? Not many people died in the flames of Surya. It was because the flames did not rise suddenly, but bloomed slowly so that people could evacuate. Moreover, in the middle of the main street, Surya even made way for people to evacuate. What are you aiming for? Agni, who realized the fact, suddenly felt a strange sense of oppression. If it was not the village that he had aimed for from the beginning, then... You are clueless, Agni. Agni's eyes widened at Surya's words. Did you notice now? Don't tell me you. I called you from the beginning. If there was a fire in the village, Agni would be the first to notice. Surya must have known that. From the beginning, her purpose was not the village. And probably, Surya stopped moving and looked up. The others will be here soon. Roar. The sky, which was red with flames, opened up. In the sky, Deva's ships began to appear one by one. Lucky. Click. Surya snapped her fingers. At the same time, one of the clouds covering the sun split open, and a huge ship appeared. Hidden in the clouds. Since when had it been hiding there? Agni's eyes, which had suddenly lit up, turned to the ground. The burning village. People fleeing the fire. Agni appeared in the village that Surya had burned, and below it, Deva's ships appeared. That means, don't come. At Agni's cry, the Deva ships that were descending stopped moving for a moment. But only for a moment. No matter how much Agni ordered them, they could not just leave Surya, who had betrayed Deva and burned the village. Agni's eyes turned red as he watched the ships that did not listen to him. I told you not to come. A hollow cry. Deva must have heard his cry. It's too late, Agni. A huge amount of magic power was felt from the giant ship. As if preparing for a bombardment, cannons that had finished preparing to emit magic power could be seen under the ship. Surya, who had prepared for this situation in advance, moved her hand without hesitation. Fire. Flash. Light erupted beneath the sky. Surya's enormous, prepared ship possessed a different dimension of power than the other ships that had hastily appeared. The bombardment began. Deva's ships were destroyed in an instant. Agni desperately tried to prevent the damage, but he was eventually blocked by Surya. After the bombardment from the ship ended, what appeared was the village reduced to ruins and Agni covered in wounds. Surya, this is the end for you today, Agni. Surya mocked Agni. Above her head, the rankers following Surya lined up in a swarm as they exited the ship. Tzzzzt. Steam billowed from Agni's body. The reinforcements from Diva had all been annihilated by the bombardment just now. Now, only Agni remained, having endured the damage to block the bombardment. I have to survive. Vishnu was not in Diva right now. Now that it was rotten to the point where it was impossible to tell where it started and ended, his death could potentially lead to the destruction of Veda. Right now, he had to survive somehow. Flames rose from Agni's body. Agni, seeping into the village that had become a sea of fire by Surya. As if she would not let Agni escape, Surya also jumped into the fire. Do you think I'll let you? Roar. Crimson flames engulfed Agni's body. Agni, who had hurriedly tried to get away, reappeared with a burn on his shoulder. Ah! Screech. Immediately after, the bombardment poured down. Boom, dodging the spears and skills shot by Surya's men while escaping the range of the bombardment. He was confident in his agility, but there were too many of them. Agni had never imagined that the forces that had joined the administrator would be this large. Since when did Diva become so rotten? Roar. At that moment, the bombardment poured down on Agni's head. Judging that it was unavoidable, Agni swung his arms wide and ignited flames. Rumble. Boom. The flames that surged upward blocked the bombardment. However, just once, the moment he looked away. I got you, Agni. Quote exclamation mark quote. Roar. Boom, boom, boom. As if a trap had been set in advance, a series of huge explosions occurred at the place where Agni had arrived. The red flames pushed away the flames that were wrapped around Agni's body. Even without that, Agni, who was desperate to escape, could not handle Surya, who had prepared his skills in advance. Chi. The place where the flames had passed once. Agni's body, which was ripe red, staggered with a sagging body. Don't be too resentful, Agni. Step by step, as the distance between Surya and Agni narrowed, the shelling naturally stopped. Originally, we were not the owners of this tower. They gave up their seats and we just borrowed them for a while. Are the administrators scary? Even though it seemed difficult to stand, Agni's eyes were still blazing red. I didn't think his spirits would be easily broken, but his mental strength is at this level. Surya acknowledged Agni inwardly and nodded at the question. I made one condition. Try to kill Vishnu. Then I will gladly be on your side. Surya, I needed to be sure. The conviction that we can defeat monsters like Vishnu, Zeus, Hercules, or the great heavenly emperor. At her request, the administrator willingly turned Vishnu into dust. It was from that moment, Surya decided to side with the administrator. Anyway, those guys are just dogs who follow my words. The problem is you are guys like Yama. Surya reaches out to Agni with a meaningful smile. What do you think, Agni? Do you want to do it together? Together. Agni, who smiled broadly, raised his middle finger. Eat this. Too bad. If you said you would do it together, I would have teased you more and killed you. Surya reached out to Agni. Red fingernails that were sharply bent. Soon, she reached out for his neck and left a final greeting. Then goodbye, Agni. Shuaik. Thud. The hand that stopped in front of Agni's eyes. Agni, who raised the corners of his mouth powerlessly and smiled, looked at the warrior who had stepped between him and Surya. If you had helped me a little sooner, where would it have been added? Your words are too rude to your savior. Kwang. The hand that grabbed Surya's wrist. Surya's eyes widened as the fight was interrupted. This is the territory of Diva. If it had been another Diva ranker who had intervened in the battle, they would not have been so surprised. However, Athena, why are you? I received my father's orders. Goo. At that moment, a gigantic chariot appeared above Surya's ship. From now on, Olympus will protect Diva. Athena, riding in the sun chariot, and the warriors of Olympus flew straight to the Diva battlefield. Rumble, rumble, the sky was filled with dark clouds. Thunder and lightning struck, and dust flew through the valley as 4 administrators talked while walking. We underestimated them. No one thought it would be an easy fight. It was our fault for underestimating heaven and the heavenly great emperor. 4 of us have already died. The operation to destroy heaven had gone up in smoke. The faction called Taishang Laojun had disappeared, and 4 of the administrators had died. The damage was severe. It was even worse because it had happened when they were sure of victory after killing Vishnu. Maybe they would lose. A sense of unease bloomed. Furthermore, wasn't there one more? This time, a variable that was not registered in their rankings had intervened. Are you talking about that guy, Kim Yoo-hoon? Yes. Does anyone know anything about him? Quote. Silence. None of the administrators knew about the mysterious player named Kim Yoo-hoon. What kind of abilities he had? when he had cleared the tutorial and where he had been until now. Creak. The footsteps of the 4 administrators walking side by side stopped. Now was not the time to worry about such a guy. Growl, growl. The sound of a beast gradually grew louder. At the end of the dark valley, the torn eyes of a red reptile glowed in the darkness. We've been waiting for you, Vritra. Vritra, one of the oldest monsters in this tower. It was at the apex of the dragon's vein, and it had been asleep ever since the fight with Indra. What are the administrators doing here? Rumble. In response to his question, the administrators looked up at the thundering sky and mentioned the name of the strongest dragon's vein. We came to meet Ananta. Chapter 570. Yu-1 and Zeus talked for quite a long time. Zeus had quite a bit of information on the executors, more than Yu-1 had thought. Their movements, the traitors within Diva, and even the executors, dark hands that reached far and wide. They seemed to have been quite busy. For the past decade, Yu-1 had lived peacefully. Thanks to being forgotten by everyone, he was able to live each day as he had always wished. But even during that time, Zeus had not stopped. He had become the best and ruled over the strongest guilds. He had become the linchpin of the large guilds and kept a close eye on the executors' movements. Their long conversation continued. Pandora had started to nod off, bored with the conversation, and Heracles was unable to participate properly, only moving his eyes from side to side. As their conversation came to an end, Yu-1 became certain of the information that Zeus had shared. Who helped you? Do I have to tell you? It seems like you don't plan on telling me. You're very perceptive. He was hiding something, so Yu-1 would hide something of his own in return. Yu-1 glared at Zeus with a frown. It must have been one of the executors, anyway. That's right, probably. He didn't confirm or deny it. It didn't seem like he would give a proper answer no matter how much Yu-1 pressed him. The connection that could provide information on the executors. It seemed that Zeus intended to keep it all to himself. It won't be easy to get it out of him. Strictly speaking, Yu-1 and Zeus were not allies. It had been the same in the past, but the two of them were simply aiming for the same goal. They revealed what they needed to each other to achieve that goal, and what they hid was their own abilities. Yu-1 picked up his now cold cup of tea and took a sip. Out of all the information he had learned from Zeus, there was only one thing that really bothered him. Ananta. Ananta, Diva's old enemy, the being that even Vishnu had been unable to kill and could only seal away. They've gotten their hands on a dangerous guy. If the executors brought that guy into the fray, the battle would become even more complicated. We can't drag this out. Zeus spoke at Yu-1's mutter. Are you talking about Ananta? Yeah, quote. Heracles still looked confused. Unlike Yu-1 and Zeus, he didn't know the name Ananta. Who was that? Since it was a name forgotten in the long history, it was natural for Heracles not to know Ananta. Only the high rankers of Diva close to Vishnu continued to use that name. Furthermore, Heracles was quite young among the high rankers. A monster that Vishnu sealed long ago. Not only Vishnu, but also several ancient rankers stuck together. The Ox King and Odin were included. How do you know that? You're the newest guy in the tower. To Zeus' question, Yu-1 smiled faintly with his golden eyes. It was an appropriate question that came at an appropriate time. I experienced it. Experienced it. Right across, Zeus was following the car with the floor exposed. He seemed to be trying to act as nonchalant as possible, but for a very short moment. There was a slight twitch of his eyebrows that caught Yu-1's sharp eyes. It's a bit unfair to use the Wan Golden Needle while looking at my expression. Wan. The Wan Golden Needle used to examine Zeus' expression. Thanks to the Wan Golden Needle, which detects even the slightest changes in the opponent's expression, as well as the lies and truths contained in it, Zeus had no choice but to reveal his insides. Well, I guess Sujita-san is right. The one who gave me the information was the administrator of the tutorial. Recalling the large, beggar-like administrator he had met a long time ago, Yu-1's eyes lit up. He came to me and released information about the administrators. He said he wanted the outcome of this fight to not lean to either side. Did he originally think we would lose? Probably, of course. Facing Yu-1, Zeus uttered words that were difficult to speak. That guy must have forgotten about you too. The administrator of the tutorial is special. The lower the level of the administrator managing the lower floors, the lower the rank and the weaker they are, but he was an exception. Tutorial. The lowest part of the tower and the place where all worlds gather into the tower. I don't remember that guy either. The car was already creepy. An administrator who was not in Azathoth's memory. He happened to visit Zeus and handed over information about the administrators. Now you tell me, You said you experienced Ananta. The story about the administrator of the tutorial was information that needed to be heard. Having received one, it was now time to give one. Yuan nodded and answered Zeus's question. Ah, yes, that's right. How? You must know where I came from, right? Thump. Yuan, who had answered a question with another question, immediately rose from his seat. When Zeus, who had yet to hear the answer he wanted, furrowed his brows slightly, Yuan motioned for Heracles to stand up. We shouldn't be dawdling here. Let's hurry. You're not even going to answer properly and you're trying to move. Didn't I tell you before? As far as he remembered, it had been quite some time since Ananta had awakened. More than anything, Vishnu, who had been managing the seal, had died just recently. We don't have much time. From now on, time was our enemy. Thud, thud, the valley shook with every step Britra took. The 4 administrators followed Britra deep into the valley that stretched out long. Splash. Water flowed inside the valley. As the smell of grass began to spread, Britra, who was leading the way, turned his head and looked back at the administrators. If you dare to do anything reckless, then you will be the first ones to burn to death. Keep that in mind. Don't worry, since we have the same goal, there's no reason for us to betray you here and now. Growl. After glaring at the administrators for a moment, Britra warned them once more before moving to the side and folding his spread wings. And what was revealed? A tree. Is that Vishnu's skill? A giant yellow dragon surrounded by trees. No, there was more than one dragon. Yamata no Orochi would cry. How many heads are there? A dragon with an uncountable number of heads. Monsters like Hydra or Yamata no Orochi, who had multiple heads, wouldn't even be able to show their faces. Ananta, that monster with the name meaning, infinite, was an existence that stood at the apex of monsters like Yamata no Orochi or Britra. Growl, growl, was it because of the uninvited guests? Ananta's heads slowly opened their mouths and let out threatening growls. To that sound, the heads of Ananta, who had been keeping their eyes closed, began to open one by one. He glared at the 4 administrators who had come to find him while trapped in the tree. What business do you great wardens have here? Unlike his threatening posture with his teeth bared, Ananta's voice was calm and polite. As if his body and head were separate beings, the warden who was the highest among the 4 stepped forward as the others floated in the air. We will release the seal, so help us. The seal is already released. Right now, I am merely resting. Since you have opened your eyes, you can do anything with your power. However, if you break the seal forcibly, you will inevitably suffer damage. The Vishnu tree that sealed Ananta was powerful. It not only bound his body from the outside, but was also embedded in all 100 of Ananta's hearts. If he were to forcibly break the seal now that he had opened his eyes, he might end up falling into another long period of sleep. We will help you. In return, you must help us, Ananta. The warden spoke and explained the plan they had devised. They would take back the tower that was originally their world and drive out the beings called players. Then, if you can do it, then go ahead and try. I will be waiting. A fairly decent response came back. Phew, it seems to be going well for now. At Ananta's answer, the wardens approached him. The closer they got, the more goosebumps they felt all over their bodies. Just how powerful was he in his prime? Those guys sealed this monster. It was a good thing we hurried. If we had been any later, we would have been eaten. The wardens attached themselves to Ananta to release the seal. Creak, a green light emanated from the hands of the wardens. The work to release Vishnu's seal began. Ananta closed his eyes again. He quietly waited for the wardens to release his seal. A day and a half passed. For quite some time, the wardens labored to release Ananta's seal. I never imagined it would take this long. Was the seal really so weak? Thud, thud, the trees embedded in Ananta's heart twisted and slowly emerged. Very slowly, and above all, carefully. The speed at which the seal was being released was slower than they had initially expected. Vishnu's tree isn't all there is. Yeah, that guy alone couldn't possibly have sealed something of this magnitude. There are a few more. Plus, the 51st floor's overseers were breaking out into a cold sweat as they searched for the most potent force resisting their power. There's something mixed in that's way more annoying than that Vishnu guy's seal. This was different from a simple seal. If it had been merely a simple type of seal made of magic power, it wouldn't have taken this long. Plus, if that had been all it was, Ananta would have broken the seal on his own by now. It probably won't be easy. Crunch, as questions about the seal grew. That's because it's a hex that I put all my heart into creating. A hex, swish, the overseers turned their heads at the unfamiliar voice. Two people were walking from beyond the valley. Crunch, crunch. So the Gandharva guy's setup wasn't simple. He really had his sights set on this place. A tall man with 2 horns on his head and a black club in his hand, and it's always more fun when I'm with my bro. Even Sun Ogong, who couldn't hide his excitement, was walking along with his Rui Jingu Bang over his shoulder. Long ago, the great sage, heavens equal Pingtian Dasheng, and the great sage, heavens equal Kishan Dasheng, who had fought against the heavens together, were walking towards Ananda. Vritra, who had spotted the Horse King, revealed his teeth and glared at him with his long, slitted red eyes. Horse King, the being who, along with Vishnu, had sealed the king of monsters, Ananda, with a powerful hex. Horse King, how dare you be here? And just as Vritra's cry shook the valley. Clack, suddenly, the Horse King, who had jumped up to where Vritra's head was, grabbed his teeth. You're noisy, so I'm going to have to shut that smelly mouth of yours first. Thud, the Horse King slammed Vritra's head into the ground with all his might, still holding onto his teeth. Sun Ogong, who was participating in a fight with him for the first time in a long while, smiled warmly at his brother's fiery actions. You're still alive, bro. Chapter 571. Uji Jik. The ground where Britra's head was slammed cracked open. Uma Wong didn't stop just because he had subdued Britra once. Boong, Joruk, the mixed iron cudgel struck Britra's head. Uma Wong seemed to want to smash Britra's head right away, and he swung the mixed iron cudgel without rest. Check, Joruk, Kwak Jik. At that moment, Britra opened his mouth wide and breathed out. Puwa, a breath that melted the ground, spewing out hot heat. Uma Wong and Sun Ogong jumped high into the air, and the guardians also hurriedly moved out of range of the breath. War Rook. The valley turned into a sea of fire in an instant. The rocks and cliffs of the land and alley melted and turned into lava. Britra, who had breathed out the breath, wailed with his horns half broken. Yumawa, Kya. Britra's screams echoed through the valley. The flames on the ground shook violently, and even in the midst of the deafening noise, Ananda still didn't open his eyes. Sun Ogong and Uma Wong on their somersault cloud. The two, who had climbed up to avoid the breath, landed on the ground that had turned into lava. It's hot. Hung Nim, is it hot? I'm fine. Are you bragging that you have Wanjiam Yung? Uma Wong clicked his tongue as if he was annoyed and shook his head. You take care of that guy. Huh, I want to fight that Nantanga or whatever. You're being rude, punk. Sun Ogong scratched his head as if he was dissatisfied. He had wanted to fight Ananda, but he ended up fighting Britra, whom he had fought once before. However, he couldn't show any more dissatisfaction. His opponent was also his older brother, Uma Wong, and his instructions were reasonable. There's no choice. There's no one better than you to be that guy Britra's natural enemy. Uma Wong patted Sun Ogong's shoulder and comforted him. Sun Ogong had a dissatisfied expression, but he didn't object to Uma Wang's words. However, there was one thing he was worried about. How much of that guy's seal has been released? Well, I don't know for sure because I haven't checked. Be careful, Hung Nim. Don't worry, Tuck. Uma Wong looked at the two guardians with the mixed iron cudgel on his shoulder. There are two of them. His first fight with the guardians. He had to hurry before Ananda's seal, which was behind them, was released. I don't have time for a warm-up or anything. Uma Wang's eyes turned red. It was time for him to become the great Saber King for a while. Joruk, the mixed iron cudgel struck the thick stone wall in front of him. Wu Jer Juk, the solid stone wall shattered in an instant. Soon, Uma Wong jumped over it without hesitation and dug his hand into the bare ground. Quad Duke, Ki, an anguished cry came from the ground. Shud Mayul, Itakwa, the guardian with the appearance of a giant zombie with red eyes, ran towards him, calling out his colleague's name. JJEGOGO. Uma Wong raised his arm while digging the ground. What he was holding in his hand was a brown rock mass that looked like a long earthworm. Boong, Joruk, dash exclamation mark. Shud Mayul, the guardian with a body made of rock, was hit by the mixed iron cudgel and fell back to the ground with a painful expression. The administrator with a body made of rocks, Shud Mule, grimaced in pain as he was hit by the Honchyogan and slammed back to the ground. I have been awake for a long time. Since you were trapped in the heavens by the Jade Emperor. The name, Dadawang, was fitting for the power that shattered Shud Mule's body in an instant. In the meantime, Itakwa, who rushed to help him, extended his long nails and charged towards the Dadawang. Swish, swish, sharp attacks as if 10 swords were being wielded. As the Dadawang twisted his body mercilessly like he had lost his sanity. The power befitting the name, Dadawang, shattered Shud Mule's body in an instant. Itikwa, who rushed to assist him, extended his long nails and charged towards the Dadawang. Swish, swish, sharp attacks as if 10 swords were being wielded. The Dadawang's cheek was cut open by Itikwa's nails as he twisted his body to avoid them. And in that moment, you're caught. Sizzle, a purple wound appeared on the Dadawang's cheek. The frenzied movements of the Dadawang came to a halt. Itikwa's nails and the wound on the Dadawang's cheek were connected by a thin thread. Even a small wound doesn't matter. Everything I touch falls under my cursed domain. TSSTSTST. A purple light emanated from everywhere Itikwa's nails had touched. Under the curse activated through the small wounds, the Dadawang knelt. Thud, thud, Itikwa approached the Dadawang leisurely. I gave you quite a hard time, but without you, it's like a feast without the main dish. Snap, Itikwa's hand covered the Dadawang's mouth. As the Dadawang, who had started moving again, showed a calm expression with red eyes. You thought the curse would work on a shaman? Squelch, squelch. Kuu. As Itikwa's face contorted from the Dadawang's grip, he quickly raised his arm. Just as he was about to leave another wound on the Dadawang's body to cast a curse. Whoosh. Another item appeared in the Dadawang's hand as he threw Itikwa's body with all his might. Tear them apart. Screech. A huge fan in the Dadawang's hand. As he swung it with all his might, a powerful wind condensed like a typhoon towards Itikwa's body. Crack. Swish. Itikwa's body split into dozens of pieces. Even as his head was split into several pieces like a zombie, Itikwa continued to mutter with his mouth open. Not even a word. Sizzle, sizzle. With an unpleasant sound, Itikwa's body slowly reattached itself. As all the characteristics of the zombies came from Itikwa, he was not an easy being to kill. One thing, I need to reassess the Dadawang's ranking. The current ranking of the Dadawang is 8th. Having made a significant impact in the battle against the outsiders and having a reliable ally in the goblin, the Dadawang's ranking had rapidly risen 10 years ago. But that was not enough. Unlike other rankers, the Dadawang, who had ceased all external activities as if retired, was recorded with a lower ranking than his actual abilities. Right below the Feast of Celestial Deities. I've been awake for a long time. Ever since you were imprisoned in heaven by the Jade Emperor. You don't sleep much. When you sealed me, you didn't look like this. You were much more cruel and ruthless than you are now. Wuma's eyes flickered. Unpleasant feeling. It was as if countless snakes were wrapped around his body, teasing his treacherous attic. Do you want to forget it? That time. Shut up. The sight of a monster massacring tens, hundreds of millions of humans. Throb. Wuma's head ached. It was something he had forgotten for quite a long time. You might forget if you live like that. If you live well, if you live like a human being, you might be able to. Your treacherous tongue is still the same. Soothing his twisted insides, Wuma glared at Ananta with eyes that had grown even sharper than before. Also, I should kill you quickly. Do you know that? I don't think you'll listen anymore. Look behind you. Behind, is it a trick or is it real? It was a momentary worry. And the moment that worry was delayed. Squeaky. Music could be heard from somewhere. And a strange scent came into his nostrils. Dizzy. That was when Wuma's mind wavered. Poof. Smoke rising from the valley. It didn't come from Britra's flames. This scent and sound were not new. Gonda RVA is it? Wuma opened his eyes with his dizzy head. It felt like he would lose his mind if he lost even a little bit of concentration. Wuma soon looked back as Ananta had advised. A man with gray hair flowing down to his legs, approaching with thin, long legs like a girl's. He had a fair and handsome face, and he approached Wuma playing the flute and greeted him. Long time no see, Wuma. I missed you, Gonda RVA. He, who deals with incense and sound, belonged to a type of monster that was neither an administrator nor a player. Nevertheless, he had a human-like appearance. Except for the lack of focus in both eyes, he was so handsome that he could be called a beautiful boy. However, Wuma knew how horrible his true form, how monstrous he looked. Were you watching for an opening? I thought it was natural since he hadn't joined the fight for a long time. But his nature is fog. To begin with, the monster called Gonda RVA could appear anywhere. I wasn't watching for an opening, but for the right time. Time what? What time is he talking about? Wuma's eyes widened as he thought about it. No way, come to think of it, there were two more. The administrators who moved to unseal Ananta. Cuckoo, cuckoo. The trees that were embedded in Ananta's heart began to be pulled out. The power of the spell weakened. The spell that Wuma had cast long ago had already been opened by the administrators. I'm a step late. Seeing his colleagues being pushed away, he He thought he would help, but the other two administrators hadn't moved a step away from Ananta. Their purpose was only one. The king of monsters sealed in Vishnu's tree. A being with 1,000 dragon heads, standing at the apex of dragons and monsters, laughing at the world. Ananta. It was only to unseal the existence of that being. Kya, a scream that shook his eardrums and a sense of pressure that felt like his heart was going to burst. As Ananta was released from the seal, the same message appeared to all the players in the tower. Monster King Ananta is released from the seal. The stats of all monsters in the tower will increase dramatically. Ananta is currently in an unstable state. Kill Ananta. Chapter 572. The hunting ground outside the city located in the world of the 25th floor. Puck, quote exclamation mark quote, Kwok Dupal, a player who was enthusiastically raising his level in preparation for the next floor's test, was startled and stepped back. What is this? He examined his large, notched greatsword with a strange dialect that sounded like a local accent. Lizard man. It was definitely no different from the ones he had hunted before. The difficulty of hunting increased as the floor went up, but there had never been a time when his greatsword had not pierced through. Kwok Dupal was confident in his swordsmanship. Was it a mistake? Just in case, he was about to rush towards the lizard man in front of him again when the Monster King Ananta has been released from its seal. The stats of all monsters in the tower will increase dramatically. Ananta is currently in an unstable state. Eliminate Ananta. What? Kwok Dupal let out a bewildered voice at the sudden message. Monster King, the monsters, stats increase. This was like a bolt from the blue. It seemed that Kwok Dupal was not the only one who was bewildered. The lizard man tilted its head with a puzzled expression. Yoruk. The two were bewildered. They faced each other awkwardly for a while, before Kwok Dupal made a judgment first. Yuat. Kwok Dupal began to run away. The lizard man, who had been bewildered for a while, suddenly became angry and began to chase after Kwok Dupal. Keeg. And at that moment, similar things were happening all over the tower. At the same time, Namgung Hoon, who received the same message, was challenging the 82nd floor test with his team members. What is this? Team leader, did you get the message? These guys suddenly became strong. Clang, clang. Armed undead swung their spears and swords at Namgung Hoon's team members. The defense of Namgung Hoon's party, who had been given the mission to guard the tomb, began to be broken through little by little. It was then that a variable occurred on the battlefield that was flowing dangerously. The dark sky was covered with a blue sky, and a great pressure was exerted on the ground. The magical power flowing from Namgung Hoon's body, who had lowered the tip of his sword to the ground, crushed the undead. Imperial sword form. Jegal Se-hoon, a member of Namgung Hoon's team, looked at him with surprised eyes. Imperial sword form. It was the best transcendental skill that could subdue an enemy without drawing a sword. It was only passed down to the direct descendants of the Namgung family. Namgung Hoon, who was not even a ranker yet, was using the skill that even rankers from the Namgung family had few mastered. If he hadn't been buried by Harkin, he would have been the master of the next era. Tatak, Pakak, Uduk, the undead's bones were crushed, and their skin burst. Wu, Namgung Hoon, who manifested the Emperor's sword style, took a long breath. The momentary crisis that had come suddenly had passed. However, the problem was that using the Emperor's sword style consumed too much physical and magical energy. The difficulty level has increased. Namgung Hoon never thought he would use the Emperor's sword style here for the first time. Fortunately, he succeeded, otherwise, he might have suffered a near-fatal blow. A sudden message emerged. As the seal of the Monster King was released, the power of the monsters throughout the tower increased dramatically. Ananta, a name I've never heard before. Namgung Hoon, a martial artist from the martial arts world, had never heard of the name Ananta. But one thing was certain. If I don't kill that Monster King, the ecosystem of the tower will collapse. Kia, Goo, Juk, JJEO. The ground shook, and the cliffs of the valley collapsed. A conglomerate of giant dragons covered in yellow scales. Thud. The Monster King, Ananta, took its first steps as it was released from Vishnu's seal. This is what it feels like to walk. How long had it been since his body moved? Ananta closed his eyes for a moment, reveling in the sensation. Tens, hundreds of billions of monsters in the tower praised him. Their voices reached Ananta's ears, and a smile involuntarily formed on his face. It feels like being alive. Ananta's resurrection. Even the fearsome Uma King felt a shiver, as if he, too, had fears. Wu, the Uma King, who had inhaled Gandharva's smoke, expelled all the poison that had entered his body. Foosh! Gandharva disappeared along with the smoke. It seemed the Uma king considered his role fulfilled by momentarily restraining Ananta's movements. Moreover, it's all over now. What about the 1,000 victories? He's an immortal guy. For now, we capture him. We'll think about it later. If needed, we can seal him again. A conversation between the two administrators who released Ananta's seal. They began to address Ananta, whose teeth were starting to show. Can you do it, Anand? Quack. At that moment, one of the administrators bent over in pain. What are you doing? Of course, we'll handle it. Including Uma and that monkey jumping around in the sky. Smiling joyfully, he brought the writhing administrator close to his face. By the way, I'm a bit hungry, dear administrators. We're the ones who released the seal. Thud, one of the administrators fell over Ananta's throat. Although there were two of them holding him, the other one cut off Ananta's writhing head and disappeared somewhere. Well, there will be plenty of opportunities to catch and eat later. Seeming disappointed, Ananta licked his lips again. 1,000 heads swayed as their eyes glared at Uma Wang. Uma Wang stood there for a while, glaring at Ananta. Soon, he scratched his head as if he was annoyed, putting the Facho Sun he was holding back into his inventory. Looks like it's going to be a pain to seal this annoying bastard again. Kwa Yang, gripping the Honchal Khan tightly, he glared at Ananta. No, maybe I should just kill it this time. Open hollow corner bracket, its mouth is still open, Uma. Me or you, they're both relics of the past, but I'm still relatively new. And GOOOOOOOH. Magic power began to radiate from Uma Wang's body. And at that moment, a huge shadow loomed over Uma Wang's head. Kung, Britra fell to the ground. There were round holes in its wings, and its body was twisted as it lay unconscious. Same with this guy, he's really damn persistent, for such a weakling. Kiiiiiiiing. Sun Ogong's golden eyes sparkled. He, too, had used the power of a monster to rush into battle with Britra. Looks like it's finally broken free. Yeah, that's what happened. Good, I would have been disappointed if it hadn't, you know. There was no situation that made Sun Ogong happier than a good fight. His opponent was Ananta, the being known as the King of Monsters, an existence Sun Ogong had wanted to fight for a long time. He hadn't been able to fight it before because of the circumstances. But now, they met as enemies, and they stood facing each other. Anything you want to say? Thud. Sun Ogong slung the Ruyi Jingu Bang over his shoulder. Let's go, bro. Shuak. Dodging the dragon's head, he flew up into the sky. Moving quickly here and there, Sun Ogong swung the Ruyi Jingu Bang at Ananta's head. Kwagagagagak. Ananta's teeth blocked the Ruyi Jingu Bang. Sun Ogong, who was holding Ananta's head back while flailing his arms, swung his other hand with all his might. Hoop. Jjeong. Ananta's head shook as it let out a scream. But for that, Sun Ogong had to use so much strength that his arm felt like it was going to come off. Just one of 1,000 heads. Sun Ogong, who had blocked one of them, frowned and muttered. I could use another hand. He needed a clone, and not just any clone, but one with extraordinary power. I'll give it a try. He had only come up with the idea a few days ago, but when would be a better time to try it out than now? He didn't hesitate for long. Sun Ogong immediately pulled out 2 of his own hairs. Phew, his hair scattered and flew away. And along with it. Pang, pop, pop, pop. Smoke burst from Sun Ogong's hair, and dozens of Sun Ogongs appeared from within. SSSIIIIIK. The corners of Sun Ogong's mouth turned up. He had succeeded. It feels a little weird, like I'm sharing something fun. Sharing food seems a bit off-putting, but as Ananta's seal is released, the tower's monsters grow stronger, putting Namgungun's team in jeopardy. However, Namgungun overcomes the crisis by using the Imperial Sword Style technique. With Ananta freed from the seal, the tower shakes, and numerous monsters praise Ananta. Ananta devours the administrator, while another one flees. The Monkey King and Wukong confront Ananta and start to fight. Wukong creates clones with his hair to attack Ananta's heads. Ananta strikes back at the clones with lightning, but Wukong jumps around Ananta's body, attacking the heads. Ananta transforms into a giant lightning dragon with 1,000 heads, but Wukong uses his golden cudgel to strike Ananta. Sharing food, it's like talking to the main body. Aren't we all, us? The clones retort Wukong's words. The clones' loud arguments felt like they were going to burst my eardrums. This is a bit awkward. Even though they were created from parts of the body, the clones' performance was much better than before. The downside was that the clones' individuality became more pronounced. Of course, in battle, that could be an advantage, but in conversation. So, where are we all going together? Stab, stab. Wukong and the clones all aimed their cudgels at Ananta. Grow, cudgel, piercing light. Ananta's heads burst from Wukong's cudgel. Then, swinging the cudgel and using the fire ant gold thread, the clones begin to shake Ananta's body. Leaving the rest to the clones, Wukong starts running on Ananta's body. Kya, another head rushes towards Wukong. In no time, Wukong shrinks the cudgel again, holds it in his hand, and strikes Ananta's head while igniting the fire ant gold thread. Whoosh, crash, the pupils moved rapidly. Revealing his teeth, Wukong shouts as he strikes the dragon heads flying towards him. Are you kidding me, Ananta? From the top of Ananta's head, Wukong speaks with an angry voice. Aren't those 6 heads yours? Aren't they? A growling voice. It was precisely at that moment when Ananta's movement stopped. Do you know me too? Yeah, I know very well. Wukong smiles, baring his teeth. So stop fooling around and do it properly. Otherwise, I won't be entertained either. Wukong's tone was unamused. Perhaps his pride was hurt by those words. Understood. Su Su. The heads of Ananta that burst from the cudgel regenerate. But, Su Su, Su Su Su. Unlike the first time, those heads were now composed of golden lightning. It was a rare pleasure, but you ruined it all for me. That wasn't all. Su Su Su, Su. Crackle, crackle. A huge lightning enveloping Ananta's body. In no time, his whole body transformed into a dragon made up of 1,000 lightning bolts. Crash. Ananta's mouth opened wide. The heads of Ananta, with Wukong riding on top of one of his heads, surrounded him, drooling. So, I'll make sure to chew you up especially well. Crackle. 1,000 heads that never disappeared or diminished. The dragon growing larger with each lightning bolt. Ananta revealed his true form. Chapter 573. Long ago, it was during the time when Vishnu, Asura, and other comrades were struggling in the battle against Outer. It was a time when they already sensed half of their impending defeat and began discussing who to send back to the past using the time leaf. A being that acted as a variable for both inner and outer appeared. Ananta, that guy resurrected. Ananta, who resurfaced gloriously on the battlefield with his resurrection. He tore apart the outers who invaded the tower, devoured them one by one, and satisfied his hunger by eating them. Of course, Osiris was eaten by him. Hemdal too, that guy devours anything in sight. Survivors who returned to life. Vishnu, who had experienced Ananta long ago, pondered with a rapt head. Whether that resurrection will benefit us or harm us. But it was a problem that didn't need to be pondered from the beginning. There was nothing they could do by worrying about gains and losses. After all, Ananta was not a being they could join hands with. Still, there was one fortunate thing. Ultimately, Ananta's existence turned out to be a gone for them. Ananta blocked Shub-Niggurath. While fleeing from the exposed base, Ananta coincidentally encountered Shub-Niggurath. And that day, it wasn't intentional, but thanks to Ananta's help, Son Goku and his comrades were able to escape the Outer's surveillance. Shub-Niggurath, that Ananta guy, what kind of creature is he? So what, is he dead, that big goat? Expectant faces. If Shub-Niggurath was taken care of by Ananta, the win rate that was thought to be 0% might increase by even a penny. In that case, there would be no need to gamble on the uncertain time leaf. However, forgot where you are. At Yuan's words after surveying the situation, the comrades looked up at the sky. The sky turned purple. Even if Ananta were to deal with Shub-Niggurath, it was a dubious task under the sky of Yog-Sothoth. Yog-Sothoth and Azathoth intervened with Shub-Niggurath. Azathoth seems to have been eaten by Ananta on the way. Did they take one in the meantime? I guess it's not for nothing that he's called the Monster King. Ananta, the dragon at the apex of monsters, who eats everything alive and grows stronger by eating. Shub-Niggurath. No, it might possess even greater power than that. That's why Sun Ogong had always wondered since then. What would it feel like to fight Ananta? And now. Kwa Rung, Kwa Wang. Sun Ogong was feeling that thrilling sensation he had been anticipating. Paji Gigi, Sun Ogong was enveloped in electricity. His body, as hard as steel, burned. Aagh. He mustered his strength and let out a battle cry to resist the electricity. Bu Wang. He swung his long Ruyi Jingu Bang, aiming for Ananta's head. Half of his clones had already been destroyed. Paget. Sun Ogong shook off the electricity. Immediately, a giant dragon lunged at him. Kwa Wang, the pressure from being crushed, and the power of electricity that felt like his whole body was burning. Pot, Sun Ogong ran towards Ananta, cutting through the waves of electricity. He gripped the Ruyi Jingu Bang. He swung it with all his might, aiming for the other heads. Juk, quote exclamation mark quote, the electric dragon blocked Sun Ogong's Ruyi Jingu Bang with its teeth. With the Ruyi Jingu Bang still in its teeth, Ananta's dragon slammed Sun Ogong into the ground. Kwa Yang, Chi-ji, electricity flowed on the ground. Sun Ogong, kneeling on the ground, grimaced in pain. His knees wouldn't straighten as if they had been electrocuted. Kwabang, with a battle cry, Sun Ogong slammed his fists into his knees. Quang, quang quang quang, after hitting his knees several times like that, his legs finally started to move. His arms and legs trembled. Sun Ogong used the Ruyi Jingu Bang as a cane to support himself and lifted his head. Kya, Chi-ji, the dragons enveloped in electricity glared at Sun Ogong. It's supposed to be more fun when the enemy is strong, but this was more than he had expected. This is tough, Sun Ogong muttered with a wry smile. Every single one was difficult. For some reason, it wasn't easy to even read their movements. Ananta, he was a more difficult opponent than he had thought. Pot, are you okay? Are you okay? Twisting muscles and body, Son Goku landed next to Yumawang, his eyes rolling back as he raised his head. Son Goku turned to look at Yumawang and asked, "Are you okay, brother? My body used to be sturdier. Being immortal didn't mean being invincible." Son Goku's immortality only meant he couldn't die, but there were clear limits to the durability and stamina of his body. Yumawang still had some stamina left. Indeed, his body was sturdier. I understand perseverance better, don't I? Perseverance, quite an eloquent word for you. For me, it's a compliment. It doesn't seem like it. Using, seems, is informal, you rascal. Both laughed without much sincerity. Run away first, brother. Swish, Son Goku stepped forward. Anyway, I'm immortal, right? Don't worry about me and go first. Just because you're immortal doesn't mean you're flawless. You, who have lived with that body, would know better, right? Naturally, Yumawang had no intention of retreating. No matter how strong his aura, he still had the dignity of being an older brother. His pride was quite strong to leave it to his younger brother and run away. Moreover, and I have to stop that guy. Ananta. The king of monsters who had been sealed long ago, no. The monsters, king for whom sealing was just a trivial matter. Knowing what kind of being he was, Yumawang couldn't just leave like this. If we leave here, he will devour those outside as he pleases. There won't be any penalties since he's not a player. The Monster King, the world before and after his presence was drastically different. Sorry, Goku, I can't leave, damn it. Son Goku scratched his head in frustration. He was fine with fighting, but he didn't want Yumawang to die here. Even if it was fun, he didn't want to lose his brother. Thud, before the impulsive Son Goku could react, Yumawang started moving first. The reason was obvious. He had to make a move before Son Goku could stop him. Stubborn brother, so be it, there was no other choice now. Son Goku opened his eyes wide and lowered his head. Thud, his shoulders trembled as if convulsing. The muscles and body twisted, and Son Ogong raised his head with his eyes turned upside down. When I get to this state I feel really bad. Kururung. A beastly growl came out at the end of his speech. Because he had almost fully drawn out the power of the monster, the strings of reason gradually faded. However, it wasn't the first time he had been in this state. Then, Kagek, he clenched his fists, making his fingernails collide with each other. Yorurung, with the cry of a beast, Son Ogong stamped on the ground. Kwang, Son Ogong caught up with Wumawang in an instant. The two of them joined forces to climb onto Ananta's body and began to attack the dragon's heads covered in golden scales. Quirang, Kururung, Pajijijik, Son Ogong's fingernails tore through his head, ignoring the electric shock. Wumawang's Hunchulgan shattered Ananta's heads one by one. Son Ogong swung his Ruyi Bang to block another of Ananta's heads that was aiming for him. Puwaik, the wind of the Pacho Sun resisted Ananta's electric shock. Mana and mana were mixed together, and Son Ogong and Wumawang joined forces to collide with Ananta's heads. Excellent, and one of them. My eyes are filled with tears at the brotherhood, Wuma. Ananta's head laughed at them. Immediately, Kia. Numerous heads of Ananta rushed at Son Ogong, who was wielding his fingernails and Ruyi Bang. Pajijijik, Keua. Son Ogong, who was covered in dragons and wrapped in electric shocks, screamed. Golden chains of electricity wrapped around his body. Ananta, who had bound Sun Ogong, drooled. He's a monkey with immortal characteristics. I'm so curious. Very curious. Ogong, Wuma Wang exclaimed in surprise. Ananta's eyes gleamed as he continued to inject electricity into Sun Ogong's body. Aren't you curious too, whether your immortal brother will survive being eaten by me? Immortal, an eternal and immortal being. Sun Ogong, who had such a fraudulent characteristic that even the tower was envious of, was a target that Ananta couldn't help but drool over. You this bastard, Kai Jijik. Sun Ogong gritted his teeth and wriggled his body inside the chain of electricity. In the midst of the lightning-fast chain, Sun Goku bares his teeth and writhes in agony. Above Ananta's head, a blue lightning bolt spear descends. Marveling at Sun Goku, who remains conscious despite such a powerful attack, Ananta expressed his admiration. This alone is not the end. Sun Goku's power continued to grow. Based on nearly infinite magical power, his demonic strength rose steadily, enhancing even his physical abilities. And as Sun Goku, seemingly mocking, approached even more with the impending lightning chain. Meanwhile, King Uma, using his soul steel to block Ananta's teeth, began to sweat profusely. Ananta absorbs the power and characteristics of the opponent he devours. Although Ugong possesses the characteristics of immortality, if he makes a mistake. Clang, King Uma sharpened his blade. It's my fault, I should have been better prepared. Originally, the goal was to prevent Ananta's resurrection. However, that failed, and the situation quickly turned into a situation where they had to fight him. They had to find a way, no matter what. If by any chance Son Goku were to die, and Ananta were to gain the characteristics of immortality, it might even become the birth of a monster surpassing Shiva Nigurasu and Yog Sothoth. Even if I have to die. Sizzle. Moving his toes, King Uma began to draw on the ground. A mighty king and sorcerer. There were plenty of ways to gain greater power by paying a price. And so, just as King Uma's magic was about to be completed. Whoosh. From high in the sky, a meteor-like object fell. Crash. Boom. Ananta was hit by the falling meteor and staggered. And at that moment, the hand of the fallen meteor reached out towards Son Goku, who had been restrained by Ananta. You! Ananta exclaimed in surprise. Hercules, who had fallen from the sky like a meteor, grabbed Son Goku by the neck and leapt upwards. You should have fought while watching your opponent. If we had gone all the way, I would have won. Even in that state, you talk well. Son Goku chuckled. Although he didn't like being interrupted in the fight, it was certainly a crisis. Moreover, clang, clang, Hercules wouldn't have appeared here alone. Dark clouds covering the sky. From above, a lightning strike with a different aura from Ananta's flowed. Flash, the blue light that first pierced Son Goku's eyes wrapped around the dark clouds. Lightning, roar, a spear of blue lightning fell from above Ananta's head. Chapter 574. Raising his hand, Zeus frowned in dissatisfaction as he looked at the remnants of the lightning he had fired. Zeus frowned in dissatisfaction as he looked at the remnants of the blue lightning flowing from his fingertips. It's not a very nice color. Blue lightning. It was a magic power that he knew how to use but didn't have much use for. It was a power that Zeus had taken from Indra long ago, when he had lost his thunderbolt and was trying to regain his strength. The magic power that Indra possessed. Pure lightning imbued with the power of countless dragons and the power of Indra, the dragon's natural enemy. The power of blue lightning was like the natural enemy of dragons. I have no choice for now. I need it to hunt that guy. I hope today is the end of it. Until now, he had been using the enormous power he had taken from Indra, converting it into his own magic power. There were two reasons for this. First, Indra's magic power was destructive but difficult to control, and second, he didn't like the color. Crackle. Once again, a spear of blue lightning appeared at Zeus' fingertips. Crackle, crackle, rumble. Unlike the lightning Zeus usually wielded, this one was large but not properly organized. If the lightning Zeus usually wielded was elegant, this one had a violent feel to it. Maybe that's why Zeus was once again dissatisfied with the lightning he had created. It's still not good. Zeus's magic control ability was surprisingly excellent, even to Awan. The lightning he created was a technique of such difficulty that it could not be compared to mana bullets. Zeus was the creator of such a technique, and even now, he was a few steps ahead of Awan in the art of wielding lightning. So it was only natural that Zeus would be dissatisfied with creating such a crudely large thunderbolt. Throw. Don't order me around. Whoosh. Unlike the horse, Zeus threw the spear with all his might. Below the clouds, towards Ananta's head, Flash. Boom. A pillar of blue lightning shot up over Ananta's head, accompanied by a light that seemed to cause the world to go dark for a moment. Kya! Ananta's head screamed, the yellow lightning flowing from his body and the blue lightning collided. In the midst of the struggle, lightning shot up from the mouth of one of the heads that had raised its head. Boom! The cloud on which Awan and Zeus were standing was pierced, creating a hole. Two figures falling downwards. Soon, the two landed on the ground, and Ananta glared at Zeus. That power, is it gained by killing our kin? His reaction was more of realization of Zeus' true power than anger from being struck by the spear. So it was. What? That reaction. Ananta, who was glaring at Zeus, was taken aback. Amidst the blue lightning, sporadically mixed with golden flashes. Upon noticing it, Ananta realized why a rancor with Zeus' level of skill was displaying such unstable control. Even that was taken from someone. Rumble. Crash. Ananta's tail struck above Zeus's head. Simultaneously, as Zeus leapt upwards, another spear of blue lightning materialized in his hand. Yet, you are different from the other monsters, your mind is rotting away. Arrogant words. Originally, intellect was granted to our dragons before you. Outdated primitive thinking. Boom. Sequential lightning explosions occurred between Ananta and Zeus. Throwing the spear, Zeus stabbed another spear towards Ananta's head, while 1,000 heads pushed against Zeus. In the midst of the confrontation between Ananta and Zeus, as Zeus was momentarily distracted, Yuan headed towards the spot where Son Goku, rescued by Heracles, was. Are you okay? Son Goku sprawled out like a paralyzed octopus due to the lightning. He remained lying there, looking at Yuan. You could have gotten out on your own. Then you would have been eaten by demons again. Son Goku's eyes wavered at Yuan's response. Again. The word implied that he knew similar incidents had happened before. Don't you know, I might have no ears. Why risk your life in a fight you can't win? Running away is more embarrassing. Being trapped in manhwa is not embarrassing. Why bring that up again? Son Goku, trying to get up as if having a fit, grimaced. Even with a strong body, this time it seemed it would take some time for him to recover. Isn't it better to leave it to that kid alone? More than that, is it okay to leave it to that guy? Of course, if it had been someone else, he wouldn't have believed it. Of course, Hercules and Yuan, as well as the Heavenly King who seemed to be tired, all gathered around Sun Wukong. Ananta was a monster. It was the first time since Shub-Niggurath and Yog-Sothoth that he had felt such an overwhelming difference in skill while fighting something. However, you can see it, right? Kwa Rung. Zeus pierced Ananta's head with the tip of his spear. Are you okay or not? Sun Wukong, who checked on the fight between Zeus and Ananta, scratched his head awkwardly. Are you okay? Zeus blocked Ananta by himself. Yuan asked Sun Wukong, who looked awkward because Zeus blocked Ananta more naturally than he thought. Did you forget? Whose power does that guy have? Whose? I told you to remember, but did you really forget? It's Indra. That's right. As if he remembered now, Sun Wukong nodded his head. Indra, he was known as the Dragon Slayer and was the being who wrote the first myth in this tower. If it was his power, it was bound to be the natural enemy of Ananta, who was a dragon. For a moment, Yuan left Ananta to Zeus. If it was him, not anyone else. He believed that Zeus, who had the power of the natural enemy of dragons, would be able to handle him sufficiently. First, let's focus on capturing Ananta. Zeus, who was holding a long spear in his hand, swung the spear towards Ananta's head. Heads that were stabbed in the eyes and had their necks cut off. Soon, the heads of Zeus and Ananta clashed several times in a row. Kwa bang, kwa rung. Chi-gi-gi-gi, the blue and golden lightning did not mix and confronted each other. Zeus's brow furrowed. Even after thinking about it again, he couldn't figure out why he was here doing this. This kind of thing isn't my style. His role was as a spearman. Long ago, even before Olympus was founded, he had always been in the role of commanding the battlefield from the rear and finishing the battle. Then why the hell was he? Just stall for time. Peepajig, why was he listening to that guy and moving? Zeus didn't like this situation right now. Of course, he knew the reason. Because that guy has information on Ananta. The more you know about your opponent, the easier it is to attack. That was a fact that didn't change no matter who the opponent was. Of course, if it had been anyone else, they wouldn't have believed it. Everything changes with Yuan. I don't like it, I don't like it. Kwang. The sound of thunder erupted from Zeus's hand. At that moment, so, you are the king of the players. Ananta, realizing Zeus's true identity, recognized the source of his power. Do you know me? Zeus did not recognize Ananta. There were hardly any records of him even in Olympus, and Zeus, who had been sealed away long ago, did not bother with monsters like him. But the fact that the opponent knew him. Zeus, the arrogant one who calls himself a god and the master of the sky. From the moment his consciousness awakened, he saw the world through the eyes and ears of all monsters. The guild that emerged on the tower. The war with the Outers. And even the peace that followed. Therefore, although Ananta had never seen his face before, he could tell that the being that appeared before him was Zeus. The bloodline of Uranus. I see, it makes a little more sense now. If he is his descendant. Uranus, a being with a power like a monster that existed in the same era as Ananta. If it was his bloodline, then Zeus's power also made sense. However, you're wrong, Chigigigi. Denying Ananta's words, Zeus pointed his finger upward. I am not anyone's bloodline. Not anyone's child, sibling, or father. He is the only one who can define himself. Took. Having said that, Zeus slowly approached Ananta. Do not dare to define me in such a way. Also, I am not the king of the players. The clouds floating in the sky trembled. Ananta's heads lifted to look up at the clouds. Kururur, the tremendous power overwhelming Ananta. From Zeus's mouth, who created the skill, a confidence that surpassed arrogance flowed out. I am the king of the world. His hand descended slowly. And in the next moment, flash, a massive lightning bolt, a mix of blue and golden light, fell upon Ananta. Punishment, Quowing, Chapter 575. A pillar of blue and yellow lightning shot high into the sky. The scorched rock turned to dust and disappeared, leaving a round hole that seemed to have been cut cleanly through the clouds. For a while, all sight and sound were swallowed by the lightning. Amidst the continuous thunder, Zeus stood in the middle of it and watched Ananta fall to the ground. Crackle, 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 crackle. The valley after the heavenly tribulation was unrecognizable. The surrounding terrain had changed. The giant crater was too deep to fathom, and its scope was wide enough to wipe several cities off the map. The group hurriedly retreated into the sky on Son Goku's somersault cloud. Yu-1 looked down at the hole below and frowned. You still don't think about your team, huh? This was why Yu-1 had put Zeus in the forefront instead of Heracles. Not only was Indra's power the nemesis of Ananta, but he was not the type to fight as a team in the first place. Lightning was the most wide-ranged of all the different attributes. Moreover, Zeus was the pinnacle of existence in such lightning. If it were the usual time when he had perfect control, it would be fine, but when using Indra's divine power, it was impossible to control the range. I've only heard about it, but this is my first time seeing it in person. That was the impression of the great sage, who looked down at the changed terrain from above the somersault cloud. That bastard, how many mythologies has he written? Zeus's accomplishments were too numerous to count. Rank 1. The reason he was able to become the greatest being in the tower. It was all thanks to the overwhelming power he was displaying right now. Probably countless. That's what he lived for. At Yuan's answer, the great sage's gaze turned to him. A somewhat familiar face. We met before, didn't we? Let's say that's the case. Given the situation. Indeed, it's better to do so if we're going to move as a team. He seemed to be quite close with Son Goku. Furthermore, Yu-1 had appeared here with Zeus and Heracles. If he lacked the skill, he wouldn't have been able to join this fight in the first place. I'll trust you for now. While Zeus was buying them time, the great sage, who had somewhat recovered, stretched his legs and stood up on the somersault cloud. In a strangely cheerful mood that didn't fit the situation. It's just like when Goku met that guy. A guy you can trust, a guy you can believe in. Somehow, he even gave off the illusion that he would never lose. It might already be over. He got hit by that head-on. Heracles commented after witnessing Zeus's skill with his own eyes. Lightning punishment. Of all the skills Zeus could use, it was his most powerful technique. Moreover, the lightning punishment currently unfolding before his eyes was the greatest Heracles had ever seen. There's no way he could have survived that. It's not over. It is not over. Yu-1 and the Monkey King answered at the same time. When Heracles made a curious expression, the Monkey King, who was chuckling, added. If it ended with something like that, I wouldn't have gone through all this trouble. Three people who were certain that it was far from over. As if on cue, Kya, Zeet, ZZZZZT. Ananta's scream echoed from deep within the giant pit. Thud, guess it's about time. Checking his kit, Yu-1 jumped down from Wukong. This way. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Electricity ran through Zeus's body. It was a phenomenon where the remaining powers manifested without being controlled. His expression was unchanged, but a single bead of sweat dripped down Zeus's forehead and fell down his chin. Flap. Ananta, who had spread its wings and flown up, revealed itself. There were a few empty spaces among the heads that numbered in the thousands. They were the heads that had been destroyed by the lightning punishment. As a tough hide all you have to offer. Open hollow corner bracket there's no way that's all. Kyung. Ananta folded its wings and crouched down. Open hollow corner bracket I will show you now. Red blood vessels popped up above Ananta's golden eyes. Its crouched body rapidly shrank, and the magic power that had formed its enormous body began to condense. Where do you think you're going? Phew. Zeus wasn't about to just stand there and watch, not knowing what it was planning to do. Not even bothering to take the time to create a spear, he quickly shot out blue lightning toward Ananta with two of his fingers. It was the best he could do with the magic power he had left. KWA rang. As if thunder had struck the ground, blue lightning swept across Ananta's body. And then, you're a bit too hasty. Thud, thud. With long, blinding yellow hair and copper-colored skin, and a tall and slender build with a playful smile, Zeus frowned as he looked at the man who had suddenly appeared. Ananta, you're quick. His smiling face made it hard to believe that he was the monster they had just been fighting. Thanks to you, I lost some precious heads. I should thank you. More than 100 heads had been lost to Zeus's heavenly punishment. Ananta's heads symbolized the extent of his power, so it was a significant loss. Of course, for Zeus, who had just tried to finish him off with a single blow, it was not a satisfactory result. Is that your true form? Well, never mind. Swish. Zeus turned around. Ananta looked puzzled as Zeus suddenly turned his back on him. What are you doing? Whoosh. At that moment, a fist flew towards him. Kwang. Ananta's body was blown backwards by the explosion of electricity that erupted before his eyes. Screech. Ananta, who had stopped himself by stomping on the ground, glared at the man who had thrown the punch at him. You may be smaller, but you're still heavy. Heracles cracked his wrist, which had become numb from throwing a full-force punch for the first time in a long time. Soon, Son Goku and Uma Wang arrived, having somersaulted over Ananta's back. I'm all recovered, you bastard. Son Goku glared at Ananta and raised his fighting spirit. He charged at Ananta without hesitation and extended his Naibo. And at that moment, you could have stayed down a little longer. Snap. Ananta grabbed Son Goku by the head. Son Goku was surprised by the speed at which he was thrown into the air, even with his heavenly eyes. As he lifted his head, Ananta's palm covered his face. Clang. Ananta flew away at the same time. Uma Wang's golden cudgel, which was next to Son Goku, had struck Ananta. Isn't this a familiar situation? Uma Wang put his golden cudgel on his shoulder and glared at Ananta. You're going to be sealed again this time, Ananta. If you're going to seal me, you should have brought 1,000,000 people like last time. Ananta looked confident. He charged at Son Goku and Uma Wang without hesitation. Crash, bang. Every time Ananta's fist stretched out, the sound of thunder exploded. Son Goku and Uma and Hercules joined in to corner Ananta. Added to that, Kwang, along with the sound of thunder heard from afar, a streak of blue lightning pierced Ananta's shoulder. You don't even need 10 people. Zeus. He returned to his position and kept his distance, acting as a spearman. Although he couldn't throw a thunderbolt as powerful as before because he was fighting as a team. Knowing its power, Ananta had no choice but to be constrained in his movements as he was careful of Zeus's spear. It doesn't matter. Ananta, who ran towards Hercules, who was blocking him from the front. Hercules clicked his tongue as he watched Ananta running, ignoring the spear stuck in his body. How foolish. No one could follow Hercules in a hand-to-hand fight at close range. The power of the giant dwells in the whole body. The power of Gigantomachia dwells in the body. The magic power in Hercules' body. The power of Gigantomachia was held in his clenched fist, and he extended his fist toward Ananta. Kwang, chi-gi-gi-gi, quote exclamation mark quote. An electric shock exploded between Hercules and Ananta. Hercules' eyes widened at Ananta's fist, which was not blown away. This guy, his strength. The strength that doesn't get pushed back even by himself. Hercules had forgotten for a moment, deceived by his outward appearance. The opponent is Ananta, the fact that it is a huge monster with the heads of 1,000 dragons. Tiong. The moment his fist collided with Hercules, Ananta jumped high into the sky. Pururuk. Soon, wings spread out behind his back. What, are you trying to run away? Never would Ananta have chosen to run away instead of fighting. Son Goku and Umao moved quickly in an unexpected situation. They hurriedly jumped up into the sky to chase Ananta. Pururuk, wings blocking Son Goku and Umao's way. Vritra, who had been subdued by Son Goku, woke up and blocked the two of them. You can't go. Yorororu. Vritra, gritting his teeth and flaring up, squeezing the remaining strength. Unable to simply pass him, Umao looked back at Son Goku and reproached him. Weren't you the one who suffocated him? I'm not interested in those who can't fight anymore. It's my fault for leaving him to you. Umamo sighed deeply. No matter how quickly he subdued Vritra, it was difficult to chase after Ananta, who had now decided to flee. Just as Ananta was about to leave the battlefield. Boom, space split in front of Ananta, and a black world appeared. You're annoying. Ananta, who thought it was over, frowned. There was one more, a man with black hair. U1 held a boy with loose gray hair in his hand. Gandharva, a faithful follower of Ananta. A fog that no one could catch, which had been considered a mirage until now. Gandharva was caught in Yuan's hand. You can't pass. Black light poured out from the cold ring on his right hand, Uranus, heart. This guy and you too. Wah, then the space where U1 was. The magic power that flowed out of Tartarus, wrapped around Ananta. Tartarus prison binds the target. Ananta's eyes flashed at the power flowing out of U1. At that moment, long ago, the face of a great ranker who freely wielded the power of Tartarus and lightning overlapped with his face. Was it you, the one who created this game? The one who possessed the real power of Uranus appeared before him. Zeus was just a torso. The real head that moved the torso was the black-haired man in front of him. Crackle, crackle, Ananta's eyes glowed with a golden hue as electricity wrapped around his body. Pow, Ananta jumped into Tartarus, prison. Thick darkness bound Ananta's body. Bright electricity illuminated the darkness, and two different attributes at opposite ends collided. Crackle, crackle, crackle. Wah, breaking through in one breath was a failure. Behind him, Vritra's scream could be heard. The rankers, including Sun Ogong, would probably arrive soon. I can't afford to fight leisurely. The time Vritra could buy was only about a minute. Ananta looked at Yuan, who was pulling out his sword, and made up his mind. Let's give him a few heads. Chapter 576. Kwang. Amidst the darkness of Tartarus, Ananta's hand reached out. It was a sight that was hard to believe even when seen with one's own eyes. Darkness was an attribute with a corrosive nature. Tartarus, above all else, was at the peak of such dark attributes. To literally push away the darkness of Tartarus with force. He's not sparing his body. Even Heracles didn't fight in such a barbaric manner. No matter how urgent the situation, that guy was approaching Yuan while risking his own life. Or perhaps, he has another intention. His thoughts were brief. Yuan swung his sword at Ananta, who was approaching him and extending his arm to aim for his neck. In one stroke, to cut his body in half in one breath. However, Ananta didn't avoid Yuan's sword. It was strange. If he continued like this, his body would definitely be cut in half. Wan Jiamzhang is absorbing the target. Sensory territory is reading the target's movements. Eye of prophecy is activating. He was using skills just in case there were any variables. All of those skills were telling him. At this very moment, the tip of the blade that he was hesitating to swing would accurately cut Ananta's body in half. Then he shouldn't hesitate. Rather, his opponent might be aiming for that. There was only one thing he had to do now. Swing it. Swish. Yuan's sword, imbued with Tartarus, magic power, cut through Ananta's body. His body was cut cleanly. Even Yuan, who had swung the sword, was surprised by the situation. What the? It was definitely as he had figured out with Wan Jiamzhang and seen with the Eye of Prophecy. However, when the actual situation unfolded before his eyes, he felt bewildered. Only then did Yuan realize why Ananta had done something so reckless. That's what it was. And the next moment, Ananta's severed right body passed by Yuan as light. Open hollow corner bracket, we will meet again. Definitely. Bang. Ananta disappeared behind Yuan. Yuan watched Ananta leave and let out a hollow laugh. To run away on purpose. Should I call this smart? He thought he had considered enough about Ananta's abilities and strength. He had even thought that Ananta might consider running away if he ever got the chance. However, he planned to run away from the start. Ananta was capable enough to fight. Above all, that guy didn't know Yuan. His very name had been erased, after all. Despite that, perhaps I was trying to catch him too surely. Zeus, Heracles, Sun Ogong. The top 3 rankers of the tower had all gathered. And even the Horse King. It was too much of a force to gather in one place. At that moment, Yuan had judged that if he joined, they would be able to sufficiently subdue Ananta, who had just been released from his seal. But that ended up working like poison. A situation that was out of his calculations. Yuan looked down at the sword in his hand. This isn't something that was cut. It's something that was abandoned. It didn't feel like he had cut something. What he had seen with the Eye of Prophecy wasn't a scene of him cutting Ananta, but a scene of Ananta discarding a part of himself. Even if that's the case. Putting more strength into his hand that was holding the sword, Yuan muttered in a self-deprecating voice. I was being naive. He needed to reflect. He was sure that if it had been 10 years ago, this situation wouldn't have happened. He would have created a siege so that Ananta wouldn't be able to escape in the first place, and he would have prepared even more people and spread out a wide net. Let's get my head straight. There was one thing he was able to gain during this time. Kim Yuan. Clack. Self-reflection. That was all there was. Basement of a mansion located in the heart of the city. Clack. A bright light flickered in the unlit underground warehouse. Ananta, revealing his figure. He staggered for a moment to regain his balance and looked up at his arm. I've lost so much. His arm had become faint. Since he had discarded half of it, it was not easy to even maintain his body properly. Thud. PSH. Dust arose as he sat on the sofa that was lying around in the warehouse. A warehouse with no light. Ananta, hiding in that place, snickered and muttered. I finally gained freedom, but look at me now. Who would have thought that the first thing he would do after being released from the seal would be to sit on a dusty sofa? Vritra, Gonda RVA. Ananta frowned as he recalled the 2 who had moved to protect him. Those idiots. His opponents were not good. Of course, Zeus, who had the power of Indra, as well as Sun Ogong, King Uma, and Heracles, were by no means easy opponents. On top of that, there was even a strange guy whose name he didn't know. Snap. His irritation spiked. Vritra and Gonda RVA. It was not because of the death of his 2 loyal subordinates. I've lost a lot of heads. 1,000 heads. That was the number of powers that symbolized Ananta. However, Ananta had lost many heads because of this fight. Even so, he had just been released from the seal, so he was weakened. On top of that, he had lost more than half of his heads, so he felt unsightly and irritated. Creak, rumble, and then, a man entered the basement with a torch. He discovered Ananta and was so startled that he took a step back. Who are you? He was a pot-bellied, noble-looking old man. He didn't know what business he had in the warehouse, but his footsteps urged the man on. You don't look tasty, but whatever. Snap. The arm, which had suddenly transformed into a dragon's head, opened its mouth towards the man. This isn't the time to be picky. Bam! Blood splattered next to the torch that had fallen to the floor. Ananta, who had filled his stomach simply, lay down on the sofa and savored the taste. An unfillable hunger. To fill this, he would have to eat thousands, tens of thousands of humans like the one he had just devoured. Now then, who should I hold responsible? Olympus had opened countless eyes. Olympus was the guild whose influence spread throughout the entire tower. Of course, the Olympus branches that existed on each floor, as well as Hermes' thieves, had all been mobilized. There's no special movement, Zeus muttered as if he didn't like it. Ananta did not reveal himself easily. He had hidden himself so tightly that they had not been able to hear any news of him for days, no matter how much they searched. The silence was so quiet that they wondered if he had died. However, they could be sure that Ananta was not dead. Hunt the Monster King Ananta. Monster King Ananta is in a weakened state. The monster's ability stats will increase slightly. The weakened Ananta. As he weakened, the ability stats of the monsters in the tower also became weaker than before. Thanks to that, fortunately, the tower's ecosystem had not collapsed significantly. No matter how much the monsters' ability stats had increased, there were already countless rankers in the tower. However, as time passes, he'll only get bigger. Ananta's ability was predation. He became stronger and stronger as he devoured something with power. It didn't matter what it was. Players or other monsters, if he had time, he would soon regain his original power. What do you intend to do? Zeus turned his head and asked Yuan. Yuan was the only person he could ask for advice. The world thought of him as an arrogant tyrant, but that was only because there was no one more capable than him. Asking for his opinion, that meant acknowledging Yuan as an existence on the same level as him. It was my fault. Zeus furrowed his brows at Yuan's words. That answer didn't answer his question. I'm not here to blame anyone. And even if I was, everyone who was there shares some of the responsibility. Yuan nodded at Zeus's curt reply. He was berating himself for not being more prepared. The lack of tension after outer had disappeared. Self-reproach would eventually turn into pessimism. For the past few days, Yuan had been sharpening the blade of his mind, which was deeper than any scabbard. Just like before. It's a bit strange. What are you talking about? It's too quiet. Even the monkey who was there with us knows that it's strange. What are you trying to say? At Zeus's urging, Yuan told him his guess. Zeus's brow furrowed at Yuan's vague story. That's plausible, but, for now, we should hope that he keeps moving like this. Are you telling me to pray? For now. At that moment, a purple energy swirled in Yuan's eyes. His gaze was somewhat eerie. He had only meant to observe quietly, but he hadn't been prepared for this. Zeus realized that something within Yuan had changed because of this incident. Your eyes have returned. My eyes. Maybe it was a good thing that we lost that guy. Thanks to this, your mind, which had grown dull from the peace, has returned. I can't deny that. Yuan nodded with a smirk. It was true. Just a moment ago, Yuan had thought that the biggest reason he had lost Ananta was because of himself. However, he was already done reflecting on it. My time for reflection is over. Next time, I will definitely catch him. The black forest goat with 1,000 young searches for Ananta. The 218th goat has found the target. The 102nd goat has found the target. The 591st goat is complaining of sleepiness. The 24th goat. The messages rang noisily in his ear. The goats he had released to search for Ananta had become countless eyes, sending information back to Yuan. The only problem was the goats' intelligence. How can you mistake a yellow lizard for a dragon? That's not a dragon, it's a lizard man. That's just a rock. If you're sleepy, then sleep. Yuan closed his eyes for a moment, his head throbbing. It seemed like it would be difficult to find Ananta with these goats, after all. In the end, he would have to rely on Zeus and the other Olympians to find him. Anyway, keep searching for Ananta for now. Until we catch his tail, we have to keep doing what we were doing. I will, but your guest has been waiting for you since earlier. My guest? Yuan pointed at himself with his finger and asked. It was strange, there were very few people who remembered him. Aside from Zeus in front of him, there were only Sun Ogong, Heracles, and Pandora. But a guest? He's from Diva. He's been looking for you desperately. Who from Diva? At that moment, a face popped into his head. He had forgotten. Aside from his comrades, there was one more person who remembered him. Hung. A handsome man ran towards him from afar, sobbing. Varuna hobbled over to Eugen with all his might. Chapter 577. Varuna, who faced Yuan, sobbed for a while. I didn't know what happened, but it wasn't a good sight to see someone crying with a runny nose. Hey, I'm here all this time, how much you? Your nose is running, sniffle. I wanted to kick him away, but I couldn't. Dirty is dirty, but I couldn't kick away someone who was crying so sadly. I'll give you a minute. I'll give him a minute, and if he's still crying after that, I'll send him back to where he came from. As I counted 60 seconds in my head, Varuna let go of Yuan's leg and wiped his nose with the back of his hand. Disgusting. Varuna finally calmed down and stopped sobbing. I wanted to see you, Hung. Since when did I become your Hung? Since the moment I remembered my brother. Ha. I felt like I had a similar conversation before. Still, he was once my colleague. Even though there was a big difference in our skills, Varuna survived the fight against the outer until the end. A younger brother. I'd rather have a friend. Don't call me Hung. But, treat me as a friend instead. It's much easier that way. Fry. His eyes were wide open. Soon, tears welled up in his eyes again, and he knelt before Yuan. I'm so touched that you think of me as a brother, Hung. But how can I'm. Varuna couldn't even finish his sentence. He seemed to be very touched that Yuan asked him to be his friend. I will serve you as my Hung for the rest of my life. You're driving me crazy. I couldn't convince him no matter what I said. In the end, Yuan gave up and looked back at Zeus. What's wrong with him? I brought him here because he missed you so much. That can't be the only reason, can it? Not many people were qualified to enter this place. In Olympus, there were only Hades and Heracles, and everyone else needed Zeus' permission to enter. But there was no way Zeus would invite an outsider to the deepest part of the heavenly palace just because he was looking for Yuan. He said he had a favor to ask. A favor? Yuan looked at Varuna. Meeting eyes once more, Varuna thought that this was the right moment and hurriedly knelt down. Please save Diva. It was an expected request. Diva. The large guild that had lost its center after Vishnu's death. He didn't need to look into the situation there to know what it would be like. I've already had Athena bring it here. Come out for now. I can guess even without coming out. It must be a mess. Varuna's eyes shook at Yuan's words. A mess. It was a somewhat vulgar way to put it, but there was no word that described the current state of Diva better than that. Vishnu's absence. There's no place easier for the administrators to dig into than a guild that's lost its leader. Vishnu was the god of Diva. Diva was deeply rooted in Vishnu's mythology. Vishnu, Shiva, Brahma. The three absolute beings derived from Vishnu controlled the rankers of Diva, each with their own characteristics. The overwhelming power of an individual suppressing a group. This was a world where that was possible. And that meant that without Vishnu, Diva was out of control. Are you saying that they're being targeted? That's probably it. This time, it's been proven. Varuna nodded at Yuan's words. Thanks to Olympus' support, Varuna wouldn't have been here normally. Varuna and Agni were in danger due to Vayu and Surya's betrayal. There must be more to it. Surya and Vayu were moving. Just the two of them. It was ridiculous. Yes, I think so too. Varuna thought the same. They wouldn't have made such a bold move with just the two of them. Even without Vishnu, they were confident that they could take over Diva. There was someone else. Diva, as Yuan said, was a real mess right now. Did you miss them? I caught Surya. I missed Vayu. Zeus shrugged. I don't know anything. Is the interrogation over? I asked my older brother to do it. But from the looks of it, it must be certain. With Poseidon gone, Zeus had only one older brother. Hades, the second in command of Olympus and the king who ruled the 42nd floor, Hell. He was a member of Olympus but walked a completely different and independent path. All of Hell's forces belonged to Hades, and he had the ability to make people experience death while they were still alive. I see. There's nothing more to get from him. His gaze fell on Yuan. He could guess what would come next. He had a feeling that something tiring was going to happen. You go. Of course. You're giving me a pain in the ass task. Stay away from Pandora for a while. She attracts too much attention. He knew why the guy was asking him to do this. There was no one more suited for this job than him. No one will recognize me anyway, so that's obvious. It was certain that Diva was rotten. Now that Vishnu was dead, he had become the first target of the administrators. The problem was where the rotten part was. And how big it was. So that's why he brought this guy. There was no way that Zeus would have brought the guy here just because Varuna had asked him to. He had brought Varuna here because the guy's request coincided with what he wanted. In other words, this was both Varuna's and Zeus's request. Of course, you won't hesitate, will you? If it hadn't been for Ananta, that would have been your next destination anyway. Zeus had also brought him here because he knew Yuan's purpose. Yuan let out a sigh from his dantian. It wasn't because the task was difficult or tiring. He was going to do it anyway. The real problem was something else. Pandora will go crazy if she finds out. A shadow beneath the tree. Yama, who was sleeping in it, had been silent for a long time, waiting for Varuna to contact him. When he had learned of Surya and Vayu's betrayal, he had wanted to cut off the traitors, next right away. But a single message had stopped him from moving. Varuna, wait a little longer. I'll bring my Hung with me. Hung, he didn't know when they had become brothers, but he could guess who Varuna was referring to as Hung. Kim Yu-won, the identity of the man that he had heard from Varuna was hard to believe. The being who had fought at the forefront of the battle with the outer gods and led the inners to victory. And yet, the world had forgotten him. It's hard to understand. If Varuna had suddenly said something like that one day, he would have treated him like a madman. However, even if Vishnu didn't care. Ring. A message arrived for Varuna. Varuna, do you trust me? It was a common work comment. Yama glared at the message that arrived on his kit and forcefully smoothed out his wrinkled expression. Should I trust you? He was a womanizer and an idiot. Usually, it was better to do the opposite of whatever came out of that guy's head. But this time was an exception. Trust Vishnu, and trust this guy named Kim Yu-won that Vishnu was looking for. Currently, Kim Yu-won was active under the name of Kim Yu-hoon. He had heard about what he had done in the heavenly realm. There were still quite a few people who doubted him. Most of them said that it was impossible for a player who wasn't even ranked to defeat an administrator, and that it was just a false rumor created by the heavenly realm. Of course, the name, Kim Yu-hoon, was not yet registered in the rankings. But that guy, Kim Yu-won. Thud, thud, Varuna approached from afar towards the promised place. And behind him, as expected, a black-haired man with an unfamiliar face was accompanying him. Are you really going to do this? He had been informed in advance, but he really wondered. He didn't know if it was possible or not. Can I really trust him? Swish, Yama emerged from the shadows. Varuna, who hadn't noticed him, looked surprised, but Yuwon's gaze had been fixed on Yama from under the shade of the tree. My name is Yama, Kim Yu-won and Kim Yu-hoon. Which one should I introduce you as? Whichever is easier. Yama took Yu-won's outstretched hand. He looked around to see if there were any other eyes around. You have good instincts. The eyes of the bureau are everywhere. Since our enemy is an administrator, it can't hurt to be careful. It wasn't wrong. The administrators had countless errand boys. The eyes and ears they spread throughout the tower were countless. I wish we could all hide in the shadows together. Then that's it. Quote. What did he mean by that? Black light appeared from Yu-won's hand right after the question mark popped into Yama's head. Crackle, zap, space warped. A jet black world where you can see anything, but countless things they represent. Follow me both. What? Za. The space dragged Varuna and Yumane. Invited to Tartarus. Canitbear refused. The surroundings were completely black. But that didn't mean there was nothing. The dead. No, are you alive? Those who can tell whether you're alive or dead. Thergas es follow them without fail. Thee may not bet that great own be one, but their number is uncountable. Whether you know that Luke or not. Brother, can you do this too? I can't find any managers here. Varuna just nodded his head as if it were strange, looking around and nodding his head contentedly. By any chance, can't you see it? Can't you feel it? Unlike Varuna, who simply followed Yuan, not knowing anything. This space had a different meaning for Yama. This is the first time I've seen such a deep magical power. Yama, who dealt with the magical power of the darkness attribute, felt as if he was about to suffocate from the near-infinite magical power he felt in this place. And the one who actually led them to Tartarus, Yuan. That's right, I can't find it here. He agreed with Varuna's words and answered as if it was nothing. Neither the errand boy nor the administrator. Yuan's gaze, who said so, turned to Yama. Yama's face, turning blue. In fact, there was no need to do this. Even if you don't come to Tartarus, you won't be discovered by the administrator, as Yama is worried. Even if their gaze is spread over the entire tower, they will only avoid the gaze of errand boys at best. Nevertheless, there is one reason why Yuan invited Yama to this place. I needed proof, right? It was because Yama wanted it. Woo woo woo, living beings, unauthorized, the sinners of Tartarus, reaching infinity, gather around Yama. Yama, who turned pale. Soon, his eyes, consumed by Tartarus, turned white and turned upside down. Huh, Yama, hey, what's wrong with you? Varuna hurriedly grabbed Yama and shook him. It will probably take some time to wake up. Did I overdo it a little? Yuan sighed, thinking that he had wasted his time on something useless. Chapter 578. His consciousness floated to the surface of his slumber. Cough. Barely able to breathe, Yama opened his eyes. When he first opened his eyes, he saw nothing. A pitch-black sky and ground. Just in case, Yama consciously blinked his eyes open and shut. Am I blind? You're awake. Yama was relieved to see Varuna's face suddenly popping up. This isn't the afterlife. Why the afterlife all of a sudden? At Varuna's question, Yama turned his head to look for Yuan. Seeing Yuan leisurely reading a book that he must have taken out of his inventory, Yama shook his head. I thought I was going to die. If Yuan had wanted it, that's probably what would have happened. When Yama opened his eyes again, there was nothing around him. Not the ghosts that had filled this world just a moment ago. Not the sea of vast magic power that had seemed infinite. He couldn't sense anything. They haven't disappeared. They were definitely still here. It was just that, depending on Yuan's will, what he could see or sense changed. Nevertheless, Yuan had deliberately shown Yama the truth of this place. What was his intention? Yama quickly realized and approached Yuan. I apologize for doubting you. Bowing his head in greeting, Yama looked up to see Yuan taking his eyes off the book he was reading. Until just now, Yama had doubted Yuan's existence. It was natural since Yama didn't remember Yuan. But now he could trust him. Someone who can control this kind of power. The one who controlled the power of Tartarus. With this alone, he was on par with the top-ranking high rankers. Yuan nodded at Yama's greeting. There's no need to apologize. This puts my mind at ease. Varuna looked back and forth between Yama and Yuan. Not knowing what was going on, he blinked his eyes in confusion. What happened? Nothing. Nothing at all. Nodding, Yama tapped Varuna on the shoulder. It was a pain to explain, and there was no need to tell Varuna, who didn't doubt Yuan, anyway. How much time has passed? About an hour. Fortunately, it didn't take that long. Yama, who was worried that he might have caused a lot of trouble, sighed in relief. An hour. It wasn't that long. There was still plenty of time left. We should hurry, though. We have a lot of places to contact. Are you saying this because you're worried that your wife will scold you if you're late? Do you want to pass out, too? Varuna shut his mouth at Yuan's glare. No matter how clueless he was, he knew that Yuan was the reason Yama had suddenly passed out. A place hidden from the eyes of the administrator. Yama finally began to speak without hesitation. There have been many eyes on me lately. Errand boys. Yes, that's why I've been careful. Yama, who had been with Vishnu when he died. He was the one who had been more loyal to Vishnu than anyone else. Also, he had the highest rank in Deva apart from Vishnu. Of course, such a Yama would be a thorn in the side of the administrators. Alright, then, now there are 2 baits. Yes, that's right. Do you know the contact information? I know it, but... Yama glanced at Varuna and continued. It would be better for this guy to do it. I've lived my whole life as just Vishnu Nim's shadow. Yes, that's right. It doesn't matter who contacts them. And if you're going to use me as bait. Yama hesitated for a moment before nodding and continuing. I'll roll up my sleeves and swing my side with all my might. Yama's eyes flared up black. After Vishnu's death, he had become a warrior in his own right, not a shadow of someone else. However, you don't have to work that hard. What you need is not a sickle, but a name and a face. Yes, I said it was bait. When did I say it was going to be used for real? There was no room for Yama's active in Yuan's head. Let's spread the bait first. Yuan turned away from Yama's bewildered expression and instructed Varuna. Tell them Vishnu is alive. Even if they knew it was false, they had no choice but to take the bait. The name Vishnu was such bait. A woman with pale skin and silky, blue hair that reached her shoulders strolled along the sandy beach. She had come to listen to the sound of the waves crashing, but perhaps because of her troubled mind, the sound just passed by her ears. Lord Vishnu. She was looking at the message she had received from Varuna. Varuna, Lord Vishnu is alive. It was ridiculous nonsense. Vishnu was dead. You could tell just by the fact that his name had disappeared from the rankings. But why, all of a sudden? Varuna, gather at the place sent in the message by noon 10 days from now. He was even kind enough to give them the time and place. No matter how many messages she sent asking what was going on, she received no reply. Is he crazy? Soma's expression crumpled. As one of Deva's high rankers, she was bewildered by Varuna's sudden actions. He suddenly brought up Vishnu's name and summoned Deva's high rankers. Even though he was one of the top high rankers in Deva, this was going a bit too far. That meant, could Lord Vishnu really be alive? If Varuna wasn't crazy, then this would have to be true. Soma was in a state of confusion over the news of Vishnu's survival when... Swish, swish, swish. Beneath the sandy beach where Soma was standing. Sand was being sucked down like an anthill, and from within it, an unexpected guest appeared. Did you hear the news, Soma? A man with brown hair and a body covered in fur. With beast-like eyes and an ape-like appearance, he was a ranker who was ridiculed as a common Jiqian Dizong, Hanuman. Yes, I heard. Is that Varuna bastard for real? I haven't heard from him. Soma's eyes, which had been staring at the beach, narrowed. Something's up. Really, Lord Vishnu. Hanuman couldn't finish his sentence. Soma watched Hanuman's reaction and shook his head. I don't know if it's real or not. But he disappeared from the rankings. Because he went back to the administrator. The management bureau, which manages the rankings, is also under the administrator. Then the reason the ranking disappeared wasn't because Lord Vishnu went back. Yeah, there might be another reason. Soma said so and put the beach back in his pocket. For now, we have no choice but to gather. This is a matter involving Lord Vishnu's name. Vishnu. He felt once again how much weight that name carried in Deva. Deva's high rankers were in turmoil over this one name. Whether it was calculated or not, as long as that name was in the message, they had no choice but to follow Varuna's words. Will Yama come too? Hanuman asked cautiously. Soma's expression changed as he turned his body towards the sea. That guy's been hiding ever since Lord Vishnu's funeral. Yama was Vishnu's shadow. He was ranked second to Vishnu, but he had never been involved in the operation of Deva, and he had been in hiding since Vishnu's funeral. Some of the rankers who were close to him had gone out to find Yama, but there was no news. He'll come, definitely, Soma spoke with confidence. Regardless of what others do, Yama will definitely go. He won't hesitate to jump into the fire if it's about Vishnu. Really, Hanuman, who had been quiet for a while, looked back at the sea just like Soma. We should attend too, shouldn't we? Probably no diva ranker who received this message would stay put. Not only Yama and Varuna but also Soma, Hanuman, Dhruva, Devavati, Gajendra. It was clear that numerous rankers who made a name for themselves in diva would gather in one place. Whether it's real or not. And at that moment, numerous rankers who received the message from Varuna were having similar conversations while thinking differently in their hearts. Maybe they could meet Vishnu again. Or maybe the complete opposite. Vishnu is alive, 71st floor of the Management Bureau. At the top of the enormous building that stood like a tower, the administrator observed the omen that had occurred in Diva. Is it real? The errand boy in front of the administrator, White Hand, shook his head. Don't you know that can't be true? Yes, that's right, some guys took care of it. The administrator with a gaunt face frowned as if he were deep in thought. But it's still bothering me. The opponent was Vishnu. The strongest ranker who had dominated the tower for such a long time. Although he had given up the #1 spot to Zeus, he had enjoyed being the best for the longest time, no matter what anyone said. Do you think he's alive? Just in case, he couldn't help but feel anxious. In fact, they had tried to find Varuna to confirm the truth, but for some reason, they couldn't. Varuna had disappeared without a trace. Just like Yama, he had escaped the errand boy's eyes. Is it Vishnu's doing? If so, he was certainly capable of doing that. Avoiding the eyes of the errand boys wouldn't be that difficult for Vishnu. If that's the case, if it's really like that. A cold light flashed in the administrator's eyes. This time, we have to make sure to end him. The administrator instructed White Hand to find Vishnu and Varuna by any means necessary. In addition, he also ordered him to uncover the relationship between Vishnu and Yama's disappearance. So, while the story about Vishnu was in full swing at the top of the Management Bureau. Hee hee hee, hoo hoo hoo, hee hee hee. A cheerful humming that didn't suit the Management Bureau. The administrator, who had been leaning back on his chair, turned his gaze in the direction of the humming. Behind White Hand, a man with copper-colored skin had been listening to their conversation with his arms crossed since who knows when. Who dares? PFF'd. The moment White Hand, the errand boy who had discovered the man, was about to express his disgust. Slash. White Hand, with a red line drawn across his neck, collapsed to the ground, spurting blood. White Hand, he was the chief of the errand boys on the 71st floor. In other words, he was the second highest ranking person on the 71st floor, next to the administrator. And yet, his life had ended in an instant. Crunch, crunch. Teeth that were devouring White Hand's corpse. The administrator realized who he was from the magical power emanating from the man in his long, slitted eyes. Ananta, why had he, who was said to have escaped from the seal and fled from Cheon Tae Seong and Zeus, appeared here? What's going on now? Isn't this different from our agreement? I've been thinking. Clank. Ananta approached the administrator. I don't think I need to do as you say. The administrators had released Ananta's seal in order to fight against the rankers. The Demon King Ananta, they believed that his power would be enough to bring down even Olympus. However, the tastiest ones are over there, you see. Ananta, who had been thinking the same thing, turned his fangs towards them. Chapter 579. Clack, clack, teeth biting into a giant lying on the ground. Ananta murmured, wiping away the blood from the corner of his mouth, above the body of the administrator who was dying with his eyes losing their vitality. The administrator's meat is a bit too chewy. Crackle, crackle. The aftermath of the bottle's electric shock remained throughout the administration bureau. Tens of thousands of errand boys. And the god who ruled them, the administrator. Ananta made an ecstatic expression as he devoured them. This is how it should be. The taste of the administrator was the best. He realized it right after he woke up from the seal and devoured the administrator. The power they possessed, and beyond that, the pure magic power. The ecstasy of savoring the taste was the best. Gulped. Soon, Ananta's head, which had devoured the administrator's body, became thirsty. I'm done. Crackle, crackle. Uncontrolled electric shock flowed out of Ananta's body as he stood up. It felt like his extinguished head was being filled again. It was still far from being full, but if he continued to devour the administrators like this, he would surely be able to have more heads and power than before. No. He would have more than that. And when that time comes. I don't know his name, but I remember his face. Ananta recalled the black-haired man who had cut off hundreds of his heads at the last moment. The man who used the power of Tartarus. He felt a sense of danger from him. I'm not there yet. What he saw at that moment would not have been all of Tartarus. He felt a greater, unseen power from the man. If not, he wouldn't have tried so hard to run away while throwing away hundreds of heads on the spot. More than now. Creak. He walked down the blood-stained corridor with his bloody lips raised. I need to devour more. Thud. Ananta leaving the administration bureau. Ananta, who had filled his stomach like that, headed slowly to the next floor. I ate well. Administrator. 95th floor. The world that had become a mess due to the fight between Vishnu and the administrator. Now, new people appeared one by one in the world where the player's footsteps had stopped. I didn't know I'd come back here. This time, the person who arrived was Soma. She frowned as she examined the map. It's all right there, but where exactly is it? A forest filled with trees. Even with a map, it didn't seem easy to find the way. As Soma was looking at the map Varuna had given her. Did you perhaps lose your way? A man hung upside down on a tree like a bat. Dhruva, long time no see, Soma. One of Diva's high rankers, he had also received Varuna's message and come to this place. There was still quite some time left until the promised time. Even so, it seemed that Dhruva had arrived here much earlier. You're quite the airhead, how could you not find it? What am I supposed to do when there's nothing but trees everywhere? Can't you see that? At Dhruva's words, Soma turned her head following his finger. A tall tree. Perhaps it was the case, but the thick trunk of the tree had the word, here, written on it in large letters. What are you carrying your eyes around for? Be quiet. Soma and the other Diva rankers gathered on the tree. A tree with many thick branches. Soma stared blankly at the tree, which was reminiscent of the world tree, Yggdrasil. Why, should I really call him Lord Vishnu? Even now, there was still thick magic power remaining in the tree that pierced through the clouds. Really, he might be alive. Although his name had disappeared from the rankings, there were still some in Diva who believed that Vishnu was alive. Soma was different. She doubted it. She didn't think Vishnu could be alive. No matter how much of a Vishnu he was, there was no way he could avoid the eyes of the bureau. But, swoosh, the air around Soma froze. Depending on her mood, who had risen to the ranks of a high ranker, the temperature of the atmosphere changed. Dhruva looked back at Soma, who was leading the way. Soma. At his call, Soma suddenly came to her senses. Oh, yeah, aren't you going? There's still some time left. Let's go. Soma, expressionless as if wondering what had happened. Let's go. She climbed the tree, thinking that perhaps Vishnu was waiting for them up there. Thump, thump, thump. Varuna shook his legs. Soma's amana could be felt below. Diva rankers gradually approaching. Can we really do this? Why are you asking me? Yama frowned at Varuna, who was growing fearful despite having started the whole thing. Of course, even Yama himself couldn't tell if this was the right thing to do. To use Lord Vishnu's name like this. His conscience was pricking him, feeling as though someone was stabbing him in the chest with an awl. He had no choice. It was none other than Vishnu. The one he had served and respected his entire life. Yama and Varuna had used the name of such a Vishnu as bait to gather the Diva rankers here. Where is my brother? I don't know. You don't know. He promised to come here. It was you one who had planned this. Whether it was cold rice or hot rice, he had gathered all the Diva rankers for the time being. You one had used Vishnu's name as bait for him. But then, you one himself didn't show up at the promised place. Are you going to keep relying on him? No, that's not it. Then get a hold of yourself. If you don't, we'll be the ones getting eaten. Ah, Varuna groaned and hung his head. Regardless, Yama focused on the surrounding presence with his eyes closed. They're not far. The giant tree created by Vishnu. At the top of this tree closest to the sky, Varuna and Yama stood without chairs. And the first one to arrive there was a white-haired woman with short hair. Long time no see, Devafuti. Ah, Lord Yama. Devafuti, a Diva ranker who had found Yama, opened her eyes wide. She was an upper ranker close to a high ranker and knew that Yama had disappeared. She had thought that she might meet him here, but she was still surprised to see him in person. Is this your first time here, Lord Yama? Yes. I knew you would come, but so soon. Devafuti couldn't continue her words. How much did you want to see Lord Vishnu? Her heart ached. Varuna and Yama didn't say a word to each other. Devafuti, who was watching the two, asked Varuna, who had sent the message. Is Lord Vishnu not here? Varuna's eyes widened. Debahuti sensed something strange in his flustered expression. I'll tell you later. You'll tell me. If Vishnu was really alive, he should just show himself right now. Varuna's reaction created a different thought in Debahuti's head. Perhaps he intends to appear once everyone has gathered. A faint sense of anticipation. Since there was nowhere to sit, Debahuti stood there observing the scene. Being relatively low-ranked, she chose to remain silent. However, in contrast to her, "Hey, Varuna, Shuik." Swish, a hand reached out as soon as he appeared. Hanuman seized Varuna by the scruff of his neck in an instant, making no attempt to hide his anger. What the hell is going on? Is Lord Vishnu really alive? Hanuman, let go of this for now. If you lied, you will definitely die by my hand. Hanuman, swoosh, a shadow rose up, engulfing Hanuman's body. A chill ran down his spine, and Hanuman stopped shaking the hand that was holding him by the scruff of his neck and looked back at Yama. Shut up and stand quietly over there. Please. Hey, Yama. Apart from Vishnu, the only person Hanuman feared was Yama. He was Yama, his shadow, and known as the most merciless in Deva. If you ask me to. When it came to Vishnu, Yama was a man who could do anything, even turn against his own people. It could be something as simple as finding someone's presence annoying. For now, he just needed to save his own skin. Phew. Varuna, who had just escaped Hanuman's grasp, heaved a sigh of relief. If it hadn't been for Yama's support, this place would have been filled with people roasting him alive. After that, Yama became Varuna's shield. And so, the stage set by the two of them was filled to the brim. Numerous rankers who were part of Deva gathered. All the big shots are here. Not just the high rankers, but also the rankers from the mid-level guilds affiliated with Deva. Rankers who were the core of the guild. Their numbers easily exceeded 200. It's amazing how they can gather like this. Debahuti felt the true extent of Deva's influence for the first time. Although it has faltered recently due to Vishnu's death, Deva is still Deva. Along with Olympus and Asgard, it was one of the strongest guilds in the tower. Amidst the growing attention, Varuna, who had caused the incident, broke out in a cold sweat without anyone noticing. They were all looking at Varuna, curious about the news of Vishnu's survival. Varuna, you can do it. Make your expression look as convincing as possible. As if there was some serious secret that couldn't be said right away. Maintaining that expression was what Varuna had to do now. However, why is that guy here? Voices of bewilderment. Thud, thud, an unexpected guest visited the place where Deva's rankers had gathered. There are a lot of you gathered here. A man in white greeted the Deva rankers who were gathered around him with a bright face. He looked around twice and waved at Varuna and Yama when he found them. How have you been, Varuna, Yama? Yama's hand trembled. He was seized by the urge to run towards the man who had just appeared before his eyes and snap his neck. He couldn't help it. Vayu. He was the mastermind behind the attack on Deva with Surya. He was a traitor to Deva who had failed to kill Varuna and escaped. And at that moment, Yuan was looking at the same face as Varuna from a distance in the tree. A man in white. As he appeared, the atmosphere around him changed. Vayu, is it? He had memorized the faces of Deva's core rankers. Moreover, he had learned through Varuna that he had betrayed Deva. Things are getting interesting. Whoosh. Yuan's eyes blazed. The golden eyes of truth discerns truth and falsehood. His vision expanded, and he could see the Deva rankers who were bewildered by Vayu's appearance at a glance. Their expressions were much more colorful than before. Various emotions such as bewilderment, anger, and surprise were visible. It's fortunate, rather, Vayu, a traitor to Deva who had been confirmed to be on the side of the administrators. Thanks to him, it's become easier to read their expressions. His appearance seemed to make things easier. Chapter 580. 3,000 years ago, Vayu, who had just become a player, was walking down the street, wounded and half-naked. There were always sly players who targeted new players who had just entered the tower. Damn it, thud. Eventually, Vayu collapsed. The wound on his stomach was getting bigger and bigger. He had to hurry and stop the bleeding, apply medicine, and treat the wound for a long time. However, over there, he ran that way. Don't let him get away. The existing players who had taken everything from Vayu relentlessly chased him as if they wouldn't leave any regrets. Damn it, damn it, damn it. It was impossible to run away with this body. It was the end of the road for him to move his legs with only his willpower. It was unfair. How did he survive? How did he pass that hellish tutorial? Why is the building shaking? His vision was getting blurry. The focus in Bayu's eyes, who was sitting on the ground, disappeared. The footsteps of the pursuers who were chasing him were getting closer and closer. There was no hope anymore. And then, isn't it too early to give up? Swish, someone appeared in his blurry vision, and when their hand touched him, he felt something warm. A man who appeared in front of Bayu like that. Vishnu covered Bayu's eyes with a gentle smile. Once you've had a good rest, everything will be better. That day, Bayu was saved by Vishnu like that. Swaha, a murderous aura covered the hall. Countless eyes were on Bayu. There were few people who were stronger than Bayu, but there were too many of them. Everyone, calm down a bit. It's suffocating. Bayu. How dare you show your face here? His colleagues were shouting. As expected, Bayu took out a fan from his arms and waved it around. Puwaa, a strong wind blew. However, it didn't contain any murderous intent, and it wasn't a threatening wind to the rankers gathered here. The meaning of the wind was clear. It meant to be quiet. If you have a brain, think about it, you bastards. Tisk, Bayu clicked his tongue. His words were like adding oil to the fire that had been hurriedly put out. What, bastards, did you just say that, Bayu? The diva rankers were furious again. However, no one moved rashly like before. They were all experienced rankers. The fact that Bayu, who was currently a public figure of diva, had appeared here meant that he definitely had something to say. Yeah, you guys are bastards. Bayu said as if he was stating a fact. At that moment, his gaze turned to where Yama and Varuna were. Think about it, what do you have to do to survive right now? Are you saying that we should betray Diva and join the administrators? Hanuman, enraged, shouted. He strode towards Vayu. The tree under Hanuman's feet twisted and withered, showing his anger. Vayu was calm, as if he had expected this. It's not betrayal. What nonsense are you talking about? Weren't we all united under Vishnu anyway? Now that Vishnu is gone, what's the point of us sticking together as devas? As if he couldn't listen any longer, Hanuman swung his arm and shouted. That's betrayal, Vayu. Swoosh, sand rose from the withered tree. A pile of sand swirled around Vayu. Hanuman, who had drawn his magical power, had bloodshot eyes. Vishnu has fallen into the hands of the administrators. How can you side with those administrators? At that moment, crackle, the sand that was covering Vayu froze. The sand was tightly bound. And the familiar magical power that opposed Hanuman. Calm down, Hanuman, listen to me. Hanuman looked at the woman who had stopped him. Soma, Vayu is talking, isn't he? She stood in front of Vayu. She wasn't alone. His hesitant colleagues. No, those he thought were his colleagues. It wasn't just Vayu and Surya. Bang, bang, bang. The tree shook with Hanuman's anger. He was a diva high ranker. Although his rank was lower than Vayu's, he was a being with the power of dozens of ordinary rankers. But he didn't move rashly. No, he couldn't, because he couldn't arbitrarily decide how far the devas had rotted. All right, I'll listen. Go ahead and talk. Thank you, Hanuman. He wanted to punch her in the face, which was smiling sadly. But he couldn't, because he knew that this was not a situation that he could handle on his own. There was only one person who could turn this situation around. Stealthily, Hanuman's gaze turned to Yama, who was quietly watching the situation. Why aren't you moving, Yama? Now that Vishnu was gone, he was the one with the most outstanding skills among the diva rankers. A high ranker with a double-digit ranking. With his power, he could face not only Vayu and Soma, but also about 10 high rankers at the same time. More than anything, he was more sincere to Vishnu than anyone Hanuman knew. Yama, who had lived his whole life as Vishnu's shadow. So he thought that he would surely be furious with Vayu's appearance. Could it be that you too, Yama? He had a hunch, but he couldn't judge carelessly. Who would have thought that the devas would become like this in the first place? He felt a throbbing pain in his head. Everyone he thought was his colleague might be his enemy. In the meantime, while Hanuman remained silent, Vayu continued speaking. Vishnu will not return. We have to make a choice. Live or die. Is it not possible to fight and defeat the administrator? Do you think it's possible? Vayu sneered at someone's question. It might have been possible up until 10 years ago. But King Odin is dead, and so is Vishnu. And countless other rankers have lost their lives. There's no chance of winning. That's right, and now even less so. Because many rankers, including myself, have joined the administrator. You speak such cowardly words so confidently, Vayu. Vayu looked back at Hanuman, who was growling. I can't help it, Hanuman. I'm sorry to Vishnu, but I want to live a little longer. How can you forget the grace you received from Vishnu? Vishnu, Vishnu, Vishnu. Wah! At Vayu's cry, sharp winds swirled around him. Winds filled with killing intent. Vayu, his eyes bloodshot, waved his hand and shouted. How long do I have to be bound by such things? He saved my life once or twice, so what? Is my life Vishnu's? Vayu turned away from Hanuman and looked at Varuna. Varuna took a startled step back at Vayu's face, which was filled with killing intent, completely different from the Vayu he had always known. Think carefully, Gu, and in that moment, think about who's here right now. Up in the sky. Above the clearing clouds. Ka, www. Familiar laughter echoed from above. Thousands upon thousands of jesters. The errand boys. Floating in the sky, the errand boys looked down at the diva rankers. Why had they not noticed such a large number above their heads until now? Surely not. Shall I guess what you're thinking? Vayu spoke slowly, like a quiz, at Hanuman's anxious expression. Is the administrator here, too? Gu. Mana weighed down on the bodies of the diva rankers, as if answering his question. Correct, Hanuman. It was terrifying. No, it was more than that. An instinctive fear and awe. Hanuman broke out in a cold sweat as he restrained his feeble mind from kneeling on its own. This is the administrator. Hanuman, who had taken the lead in refuting Vayu's words head-on, lost his courage. Seeing the thousands of errand boys, as well as the figure of a woman appearing among them, Hanuman could do nothing. Fight. He could not even imagine fighting an opponent like that, who had now appeared before his eyes. Damn it. Thud. Hanuman pounded his fist on his trembling leg. He barely regained his senses from the dull pain that spread. Even though the administrator appeared, I trembled in fear instead of raging in front of Vishnu's enemy. It shouldn't have happened. Think carefully. Soon, he, who was not Vayu of Diva but the administrator's spokesperson, looked around. Will you entrust your life to Vishnu, who is already dead? Or will you survive? Quote, 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 quote. Silence fell in the hall. Complex thoughts floated on their faces. They looked at each other's expressions. Among them, some had confident expressions as if they had made up their minds. Hanuman looked around in bewilderment. What's wrong with you guys? Even if it was a threat with life as collateral, are you guys really going to fall for that crap? It was strange. No matter how precious life was, many of them were shaking too easily. Diva's rankers who had overcome the crisis of life and death and were among the top. I'm sorry, Hanuman. Thud. At that moment, the first person who made up their mind appeared. Please understand, this is our decision, Soma. She approached Vayu and told him whose side she was on. And that was the beginning. Creak, creak, creak. Diva's rankers gathered around Vayu. Watching them move as if they had made a promise, Hanuman pondered what Soma had said. As if she had expected this situation, Hanuman realized the identity of the strange sense of dissonance he had been feeling. Thud. These damn things. Those who had already crossed over before coming here. Diva was already rotten and rotten long ago. And so were the others. There's no way this will work. Even the administrator has come. Die or keep your faith. One of the two. Now, it was time to choose. To die or not. Yama, say something. Hanuman looked back at Yama. If he was the one who was more loyal to Vishnu than anyone else. I thought he wouldn't be angry at this situation even a little. However, Yama still didn't respond. He stood there with his arms crossed, his eyes closed. Holding his breath as if he was thinking about something. No way, Yama, you too. Now that he couldn't trust anyone he thought was a colleague. It wouldn't be strange for Yama to betray Diva. Maybe even Varuna, who created this place. Who? Yama raised his head. The sky above where the errand boys laughed and chatted. Yama gritted his teeth as he met the gaze of the administrator looking down at them. And then, thud, another one started to move. It was hard to hold back. As he moved, Yama finally uncrossed his arms and opened his eyes. Can I move now? Yes. Crash. Yu-1 approached Vayu with his eyes burning red. I don't have to endure it anymore.